Galactic Rift, Mage Saga Book 8, written and narrated by J.J. Green. Chapter 1. The Bathsheba hung in darkness, the light of every star surrounding her blocked. The ancient colony ship sat in a cloud of all-enveloping pervasive dust. She had been shrouded for days, her fuel tank slowly but steadily emptying, as the Black Dog senior pilot, Xiao, fought to free her from the inexorable pull of an unidentified gravity well. Something had to be done, but Carina had no idea what. "Can't we catch a break for once?" she muttered to the void as scan data figures scrolled past on her interface. "What was that?" asked Xiao. "Do you have an idea?" Her features had grown more tired and drawn over the long hours she'd spent at the helm, trying every trick in the manual and a few more she'd come up with to try to break the ship free of the mysterious drag. It was the quiet shift, and they were the only two people on the bridge. Just talking to myself. Carina sat down and put her head in her hands. She'd barely begun to recover from her brush with death, courtesy of an anomalous star draining her life force, when the new problem had presented. She still felt weak, but as de facto leader of the ship's company, the pressure was on her to find a solution. "You know," said Xiao, "if we don't do something soon, we won't have enough fuel to reach the nearest inhabited system, according to the chart." "I know!" Carina exclaimed. They'd dipped below the level of fuel needed to reach Earth 3 days ago. Once the Bathsheba was at her top cruising speed and everyone was in deep sleep, they could have, and would have, coasted for decades on minimal power. But fighting the pull of gravity required constant fuel expenditure. The dream of the final leg of their long journey had become just that. Their new reality entailed yet another stop at a civilized planet to refill the tanks. That was assuming they managed to escape whatever was dragging them in. "Sorry," Carina murmured, her head slumping into her hands again. "It's okay. I know I'm only stating the obvious. We're all repeating ourselves. We've run out of things to say." The discussions and arguments had seemed endless. The situation made no sense. The gravitational effect on the ship should have also applied to the dust cloud. The particles should have been travelling toward the source too, yet they were not. The star charts showed no black hole, though they did mark the cloud. It was a vast area of cosmic dust of unknown origin. Nothing was known about what it contained either. Their course should have taken them past it, not through it. "What else is there to say?" Xiao asked sadly. "We don't have any choices here. We're going wherever that damned drag wants to take us." The bridge door opened and Bryce walked in. "Hey ladies, any change?" "No," Carina answered, not moving her downcast posture. "No change." "Well, I have some good news to cheer you up." She lifted her head. "You've thought of something we can do?" "Oh." She slumped again. "You know our newest shipmate?" "Uh-huh." Ava, one of the Marchonish women who had recently joined the ship, had given birth about a week ago. Her mother has decided what to call her. She's naming her after you, Carina. "That's nice." "It's a great honor. You should be pleased." "Should I?" All Carina could think was that another person was heading toward destruction and there wasn't anything she could do about it. And somehow it was her fault. "Stars," said Xiao. "That's terrible news." Bryce frowned. "Why?" "It means we'll have 2 of them to deal with. Can you imagine 2 Carinas?" "Very funny." She hauled herself to her feet. "I wish Jace was here. He was no starship navigator, but he had the wisdom to help us face whatever was coming. I don't have a clue what to tell people." Xiao said, "The Black Dogs are all grown-ups, with hairy bits, muscles, the lot. They don't need you to tell them anything." "All right, But what do I tell the kids? She turned to Bryce. And the Marchonish women Van Hasty so kindly invited to join us. They would have been better off if they'd stayed with their slave-driving men. I'm not so sure about that. At least here they get treated like human beings, and they're free to do what they want, within reason. Fantastic. I hope they enjoy their final 3 days of freedom. Is that as long as we've got? Bryce asked, eyes widening. We don't know. We don't know the mass of whatever it is that's pulling us in. The scanners aren't telling us a thing. Still nothing? She gave him a look. Okay, I'm the king of stupid questions. I just thought we should know something by now. The bridge door opened again. Chertang had arrived. The former team leader of an underworld boss. He had helped them destroy a planet that had been the excuse for an endless and endlessly lucrative for some war. In return, he'd earned passage on the ship. It was a decision he probably now regretted. He had kept a low profile since Carina had recovered from her long sickness. He began, but he didn't follow through. He looked at the 3 of them guiltily, as if something was weighing on his mind. Things aren't looking too great for us, right? Carina replied. You can say that again. She hadn't made an official announcement. The Bathsheba wasn't that kind of ship. Most news travelled among the company via osmosis. The fact of their perilous predicament had spread out the usual way. I thought so. He toed the floor pensively. If you've come to tell us something, Carina said, it's best you get it off your chest, because if things get any tenser around here, I'm going to end up hitting someone. You got me, said Chertang. I never could keep a straight face. Lost so much money at cards. He chuckled nervously. I'm not sure it makes any difference. I think I heard about this place. You knew about it? Why didn't you say something? I only just remembered. Xiao asked. What do you know? Can you tell us how to escape it? I can't, sorry. When I was a kid, I used to love studying history. Pre-war history, that is. Before the war started, the 3 systems around Lakshmi used to trade and travel extensively throughout the sector. Occasionally, ships would go missing. They were all in or near this region when it happened. Not all the time. Ships would pass near the cloud or even within its outskirts for years without incident. Then suddenly, one of them would vanish. Did any of them ever turn up again? Xiao asked. Not that I know of. Then the war started. The systems turned inward and focused their economic and technological power on defending themselves and defeating the other planets. The debate on whether to risk a journey in the vicinity of the cloud or expend additional fuel to avoid it became moot. And you're telling us this because? Carina asked icily. I just wanted to let you know. She turned to Bryce and glared. He held up his hands. It was him who told you that, not me. We're different people. She returned her attention to Chertang. So you remembered about this dangerous area of the galaxy after we entered it, and now you're here to tell us it's dangerous, but you don't know how to get out? Thank you so much. That's very helpful. I felt bad, said Chertang. We all feel bad, all of us. She looked down, clenching and unclenching her fists impotently. They'd come so far, through so many scrapes, surviving despite terrible odds. They'd lost friends and loved ones along the way, good people who hadn't deserved to die. It couldn't end here. She wouldn't let it. She looked up. Cut the engines. What? Xiao asked. Fighting this thing is getting us nowhere. We're wasting fuel in a battle that's impossible to win. I said, cut the engines. Do it now. The pilot blinked at her uncertainly, but then lifted a hand to her console. A shudder ran through the Bathsheba as the ship adjusted to the change in her motion. Now she was moving with the current, hurtling headlong toward her fate. After a few seconds of acceleration force, her inertia dampeners kicked in, and it felt as though they were standing still. Nothing much had changed, except the faint vibration from the engine had ceased. Comms began arriving at the absent communication officer's console. Carina explained, "We might as well save the fuel we have for whatever lies ahead." Chapter 2. Odd scents emanated from the Marchonish woman's room, sweet, milky and sharp. They were not like anything Carina had smelled before, probably because she'd never been around a newborn babe and its mother. She'd gone to see the latest addition to the ship's company because it seemed polite considering the mother's choice of name, and because there was nothing else to be done except monitor the scanners for new data. Others could do that. The visit would also be a welcome distraction now the ship's fate was out of her hands. The mother was called Ava, and she'd been the first to step forward when Van Hasty had invited the Marchonish women to switch sides. Her action had seemed to encourage the others to do the same, though sadly only 5 had made it under the Black Dog's protection before they were forced to return to the Bathsheba. One of Ava's companions let her in. "She's through there," she whispered, nodding in the direction of the suite's bedroom. "Is she asleep?" "I don't think so, but little Carina is. Never wake a sleeping baby." Little Carina. She smiled to herself, recalling Xiao's joke. She wouldn't wish 2 Carinas on anyone either. Ava did seem to be asleep, curled on her side facing away from the door, the swaddled baby slumbering in a bassinet next to the bed. Someone must have found a printing pattern for the specialized furniture. Carina was confident they'd had no bassinets aboard. She was stepping away, deciding to return later, when Ava turned over and smiled at her sleepily. "You must be Carina Lin." "Hi," she replied, feeling awkward. "Is this a bad time?" "No, I'm glad you're here. You're very welcome." Ava hauled herself into a sitting position, wincing. Carina winced too, in sympathy. "I wanted to thank you for helping me and my friends. There was no way we could have escaped without your help." "I appreciate it, but what the Black Dogs did was nothing to do with me. You should thank Van Hasty from what I've heard, and the mercs who were with her. But you're the boss around here, aren't you? Your friends wouldn't have done what they did if they knew you wouldn't approve." "That's debatable." It was true that she'd approved of the decision when she'd heard about the rescue attempt. Her only wish was that the dogs had been able to save more of the women. "I'm glad you and your friends made it out, but I'm not really the boss. No one else wants the responsibility. If the Black Dogs don't like my orders, they'll let me know soon enough." While she'd been talking, her attention had drifted to her namesake. Only the baby's face showed, the rest of its body and head wrapped in a cloth. Red pimples stood out on the soft cheeks. "Is little Carina sick?" "You mean her rash?" The medic said it's nothing to worry about, just her skin adjusting to being in air rather than water. "Would you like me to fix it?" "I didn't know you were a doctor too. Is there a cream you can give me?" "I'm no doctor, but I can make the rash go away if you want." "That would be great. I'm worried it makes her uncomfortable." Carina took her elixir canister from her belt and sipped a mouthful of liquid. Laying a hand on the sleeping baby, she closed her eyes and cast heal. When she opened her eyes, little Carina's skin was free of blemish. Ava's mouth had dropped open. "I heard you and your family could do magic, but I didn't really believe it." "It isn't magic, it's—" In the rare time she'd tried to explain casting to non-mages, she had never found the right words. That was because she didn't know herself how it worked. And she suspected, until scientists understood it, the words didn't exist. "It isn't magic," she repeated, "and it's a limited power, so don't get your hopes up expecting miracles. Like dragging this ship away from whatever has her in its grip." She had debated trying to keep her and her siblings' abilities secret from the Marchonish women and Chertang, but it would be difficult within the confines of the ship. Sooner or later, Darius or one of the twins would slip up, and the cat would be out of the bag. It was easier this way, and, well, they all might only have a short while to live anyway. "I thought I might find you here," said Bryce, appearing in the doorway. "It didn't take long for your fame to go to your head." Carina rolled her eyes and chose not to dignify his jibe with a reply. "She's so cute," he went on, moving to the side of the bassinet. "Isn't she, Carina?" Yeah. In truth, the baby looked like a baby. "She's gorgeous," she added to the mother. Ava beamed. "Can I speak to you outside?" Bryce asked. "Sure." As she left, she said to Ava, "Good luck, and let us know if there's anything else we can do to help. You've already helped more than you can imagine." In the passageway, Bryce said, "What a beautiful baby. Ava picked the perfect name." "You're a big suck-up." She kissed his cheek. "But I appreciate it." "What do you think?" "About what?" "We might have a baby like that one day." Her eyebrows shot up. "Are you insane? Have you forgotten we're most likely about to be crushed against a high-grav planet or annihilated in a black hole? We've come this far. I have a feeling we're fated to survive." "I wish I had your faith. What do you want to speak to me about?" "Before that, I wanted to ask you, if we had kids, it would be a 50-50 chance they would be mages, right?" "Bryce, I'm 19. Or 20. I'm not sure. I've lost track. But I'm far too young to be thinking about kids." "But maybe one day." "Something's messing with your head. Maybe the force that's pulling on the ship has affected your brain, like the star at Lakshmi Station destroying my mage powers." He said wistfully, "I liked helping my parents with my brothers and sisters when they were little." Shit. She had forgotten Bryce had abandoned his family forever when he'd decided to help her with her quest to reach Earth. "I'm not ruling it out, but—" "You need to come back to the bridge. Something's up. I don't think there's anything we can do about it, but you need to see it." Shao had put the view outside the ship on hollow. Van Hasty, Jackson and Rees were on the bridge too. Space had split. The light-absorbing dust had disappeared, and hanging in the void was a dark red, glowing chasm. It was a gash across the black, like someone had torn open the fabric of space-time. "How big is it?" Carina breathed. "At its widest point," Shao replied, "about 28 light-years." "Light years?" She turned to Bryce. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why were you talking to me about having kids?" Smiles passed between the mercs. "What difference would it make?" Bryce replied. "What are you planning on doing about that?" He jabbed a finger at the hollow. "We could—" "We don't have a hope of avoiding it," said Shao. "The pull on the ship is as strong as ever. We don't have the power to break free, and if we try, by the time we reach the rift, our tanks will be empty." Jackson said, "We're hoping we'll go through it and not get crushed by it. But it's just a hope. Shao's right. Whatever's gonna happen will happen, whether we like it or not." "Do we have any idea what's on the other side?" asked Carina. "What do the scanners say?" "They're telling us that's normal space," Van Hasty replied. Whatever the tear in the galaxy was, normal it was not. Chapter 3. The rift seemed to occupy all space. To every side, above and below, the dark red expanse spread wide. Only a tiny sliver of regular vacuum and stars remained, far to the Bathsheba's aft as she slipped deeper and deeper into the anomaly. The attraction pulling her in was as strong as ever, and they were no closer to figuring out what was causing it. In the weeks they'd spent trapped by the relentless pull, the scanners had failed to detect any high-mass bodies. But if gravity wasn't the cause of their predicament, no one knew of any other explanation. Carina was taking stock of their supplies. The majority consisted of chemical nutrients to keep them alive during long years of deep sleep. They also had mixes for the printers, edible and non-edible, and real food, powders and pastes for reconstituting, dry staples like flour, rice and beans, dried meats, fish, fruits, vegetables, algae and fungi, ready-made rations in packets and foil, and whole frozen foods to be thawed and cooked into tasty dishes on special occasions. The latter made up the smallest proportion. Lakshmi Station had also supplied them with water, and she peered at the figures and shook her head. Jackson had considerably upped the budget she'd allocated for alcoholic drinks. She would have to remember to chide him about taking liberties while she lay dying in sickbay. Their supplies weren't low yet, but they couldn't continue eating them for months. If the ship was going to be travelling in the rift for an unknown amount of time, it might make sense to put everyone into deep sleep. They could schedule periodic awakenings for checking if they'd returned to normal space. They would survive longer that way, though not indefinitely. Eventually the chemical nutrients would run out, and they would slowly, unconsciously starve to death. Perhaps it would be a better death than the current endless nightmare. Their detour to Lakshmi Station had nearly been fatal too. At least for her, Parthenia, Oriana and Fern. It had taken the life of their good friend Jace. But in some ways the episode had been more fruitful than she'd expected. Lakshmi's specialism was starship weaponry, the source of its great wealth as it met the escalating needs of 3 warring systems. But it had also offered a range of ship supplies. While she was out of action due to the deadly effect of the local star, her shipmates had taken full advantage. The Bathsheba now sported one of Lakshmi's latest and most powerful weapons. Jutting from her bow was a device sufficiently powerful to blow apart a planetoid. That had been another reason she wanted to conserve their remaining fuel. The obliterator, as Bryce had taken to calling it, required a huge amount of power to operate. The arms dealer who had sold it to them, or rather who they'd stolen it from, had given it a fancier name based on tech jargon, but obliterator seemed to fit better. "What are you doing?" Darius was poking his head into the little office. "Hey, sweetheart, just boring stuff. What have you been doing?" He grinned at this tacit permission to disturb her and skipped into the room. He'd grown too big to sit in her lap, though it had taken a while for him to stop trying, so he contented himself with leaning against her. "I've been trying to invent new casts." "I hope you haven't been doing anything dangerous." "Not really dangerous." "Darius, what have you been doing? What does this new cast do?" Her spirit mage brother had invented 2 other casts. Cloak had proven very useful in the past, turning their ships and themselves undetectable, and so helping them escape dangerous situations. He'd only used guise for fun. The cast enabled him to take on another's appearance, and he'd played many tricks pretending to be someone else, in a typical 7-year-old's fashion. "Well, I call it heat. I guess it might be dangerous if I wasn't very, very careful, but I am, so it's okay." "Heat, not fire?" "Fire makes things burn if they can burn, but heat heats them up." "So..." She looked around the room for something suitable. You could make that hot? She pointed at a metal-framed chair. Uh-huh, that's easy. He unscrewed his elixir bottle. Just a little, okay, she cautioned, worried the fabric seat might burst into flame. Moments later, she gingerly touched one of the metal legs. It was pleasantly warm. You're a smart boy, you know that? He smiled with pride. Strap in, came Xiao's warning over the intercom. If you can't strap in, find something to hang on to. Darius, Carina blurted. Sit here. She leapt out of her seat, the only one in the room with a safety harness. After lifting him onto the chair and fastening the straps, she calmed Xiao. What's going on? And why wasn't I told about it? I can't speak right now. The pilot cut the comm. Cursing, Carina raced to the doorway and grabbed the bars on each side of it, handholds in case the ship lost gravity. The Bathsheba lurched violently, almost breaking her grip. Then the ship accelerated so fast she briefly became weightless. They came to an abrupt stop, and a harsh shock juddered through everything, rattling her teeth. Carina, called Darius. What's happening? Don't worry, it's going to be okay. It was probably the biggest lie she'd ever told him. She had no idea if things would be okay. The Bathsheba's movements indicated they were far from it. The extreme motion seemed to have stopped. Xiao, can you talk to me now? Damn it, I tried my best. I'm sorry. A starship had appeared, even larger than the Bathsheba. The scanners said it was roughly twice the size of the colony ship. According to Xiao and the scan data, it had come from nowhere. The ship's design was odd. Most of the structure consisted of a vast concave dish covered in spikes. That was all that was viewable from their present vantage point. But when it had appeared, Xiao had seen a pinnacle protruding from the opposite side. The new vessel's entire hull was the exact same colour as a blue-green desert slime mould Carina had only ever seen on the planet where she grew up. At the same time the ship had appeared, the source of the drag on the Bathsheba had also become visible, Xiao had said. Their ship had been caught in a beam all along. The pilot had seen a cylinder of pale light stretching from the prow into the rift. As the strange ship had approached, the light had vanished, and that had been the moment Xiao had tried to make their escape. She had started the engine and slammed the ship into maximum acceleration, but almost immediately after the beam had disappeared, another had shot out from the new ship and fastened onto them. Now the Bathsheba continued to be drawn deeper into the rift, this time pulled by another vessel. The new beam was undetectable, but Carina guessed it was generated by the concave dish. All this time, she said, something's been taking us somewhere. This isn't some weird astronomical event, it's personal. Someone wants us. Maybe not us in particular, the pilot replied, but a starship. Chertang said vessels had randomly vanished over long periods of time. My guess is the dust cloud blocked comms. We don't have anyone to send a mayday to, so we never tried, but the other vessels would have. The dust prevents messages from reaching anyone. Whatever. It's all by design. I don't know what happened to the people on those other ships, but I bet whoever took them has never encountered mages. I hope they find they've bitten off more than they can chew. Chapter 4. There's no point in trying to destroy it with the obliterator, said Jackson. The weapon probably can put that ship out of action, if not blow it to pieces, but what then? The original attraction beam will fasten on us again, or maybe they'll send another ship the same as the first, or a whole fleet to get their revenge. The point is, the civilization that constructed that thing can reach out across space and grab hold of a colony ship light years away. It's like nothing we've ever encountered. And that's speaking as a merc who's lived far longer than I should have in this business, and seen more alien and human societies than I can count or remember." He paused and flexed his prosthetic fist. "If this was a regular situation where some asshole was messing with us, I'd be the first to show them where they can shove their attitude. You know that, but it isn't. We can't come out guns blazing here. We might find ourselves in even worse trouble. We've got to feel things out. Take it step by step if we're going to get out alive and with our ship intact." "Shit," said Rees. "He's channeling Cadwallader." "You say that like it's a bad thing," Van Hasty commented. "I'm with Jackson. Say we do break free and put their ship out of commission. We'll be where we are now, only with less fuel. Definitely not enough to get us out of this shithole we've been dragged into. Besides, a ship like that will have shields, stands to reason. We might not take it out with the first or even fifth hit." "So we just let them do whatever they want?" Carina asked. "Before the monster ship turned up, I thought we were in the grip of some weird deviation from normal physics. Now we know it's personal, we can't let those people push us around. It gives them the wrong idea." "I'm not saying we should let them push us around forever," Jackson replied. "But we can't go off half-cocked either. That would be dumb. We need to think this through." "Jackson's right," Van Hasty reiterated. "We can't let our pride get in the way. We need to think long-term." "I'm not talking about pride," Carina protested. "I'm talking about how they see us. So far we've acted like prey, passively allowing ourselves to be towed. I wish I hadn't told Shao to turn off the engine and stop fighting. We've acted like victims, so that's how we're treated." "Seems like they're gonna do what they're gonna do," Rees said. "Doesn't matter how they see us." "Yeah," Jackson agreed. "I get your point, Lin. But just because they think they've got us over a barrel doesn't mean we can't hit back when the time's right. We have to think ahead and wait for our chance. They're not going to bring us all the way here just to kill us. They have something else in mind." Exasperated, Carina turned to Shao. "What do you think?" The pilot raised her hands. "I just fly starships. I let you guys figure out the hard stuff." Bryce also didn't seem to want to contribute an opinion. Carina gave up. "Looks like I'm outvoted." "Hey," said Rees, "what about some mage work? Could your family do something?" "I thought about it, but if we're planning on playing the long game like it seems we are, I think it's better if we keep our powers secret, don't you?" "Absolutely," said Jackson. Carina tightened her grip on her pulse rifle, silently cursing the decision to not try to take out the vast vessel. It felt like giving up control. Despite Jackson's assurance they were doing no such thing. That was before the rest of the enemy ships arrived. 15! They'd come at them all at once, their arrival masked by the giant ship and spread out in all directions, making the question about firing the obliterator moot. That was the disadvantage of the weapon. It was only effective against one target moving predictably. Against many targets moving along differing trajectories, it was useless. She waited. True to Jackson's theory, the enemy hadn't attacked, yet. But as with their mothership, all attempts to hail them had fallen on deaf ears. They either wanted the Bathsheba, or her crew, or both. 4 of their vessels had moved into position alongside, preparing for a face-to-face fight. What would the borders be like? Would they even be human? She recalled the Regians and gave a shudder. They had barely escaped from the insectoid time-shifting aliens. Some of them had not. A dull thud hit the hull and reverberated through the deck. They were at the airlock. Another thud, rattling her teeth. She winced. She had grown fond of the old ship and hated the thought of more damage being inflicted on her. The Redians had torn open the airlocks too. A third thud. Weapons ready, she unnecessarily reminded the mercs in her team. Also with her were Vigo Justus, the Lotta Krillin, and Chertang. The latter had been reluctant to join the defenders, saying his specialty was large weapons tech, not small arms, but Van Hasty had unceremoniously thrust a pulse rifle into his hands. The message was clear. As an adult, he had a duty to protect the ship. Carina hadn't felt much sympathy for him. All the Marchonish women except for Ava had volunteered without being asked, lending a hand though they had never even held a gun. The fourth thud did it. A terrible screech of wrenched metal parts came from the airlock. The attackers had breached the outer hatch. She activated the magnetic soles of her boots and reminded Chertang to do the same. He clutched his rifle nervously. She prayed he didn't kill someone on his own team. Then she ordered the ship's computer to close the emergency seals at each end of the passageway. Movement could be seen through the tiny window in the inner hatch and, beyond the figures, the blackness of space. They had taken the outer door off completely. These guys were not messing around. "What's happening where you are?" Rees commed. "Our uninvited visitors have nearly opened the door." "Same here." "Bryce's team too," said Rees. "In case you were wondering." Something thunked against the inner hatch. The view of space disappeared, replaced by steel. "See you on the other side," she said, and cut the comm. Wisps of smoke drifted from the bulkhead surrounding the inner hatch. The hostiles were using a different method to break through the smaller portal. Some kind of machine was burning through the inner layer of hull. A red glowing line in the shape of an oblong appeared. Smoke poured from it, sending the atmosphere filters whining in an effort to clear it, and Carina's HUD readings haywire. The line turned white. Molten metal dripped onto the deck, melting holes in the tile. "Back up," she commanded. The team split into two, moving down the passageway. They waited. All nervous shuffling ceased. Attention was on the hatch. After agonized seconds of anticipation, a tremor ran through it. Like a felled tree, the portal, carved from its support, toppled with a clang to the deck. Her HUD flashed up an alarm as atmosphere flooded out. The escaping gases dragged her forward, ripping her off her feet. Others tumbled toward the ruined airlock with her. Some had managed to secure a hold and were only lifted up. Then all the air was gone. She quickly scrambled upright, yelling, "Fire at will!" as figures poured through the breach. Encased in matte black armor, their faces hidden behind deep black visors, they sprayed the mercs with pulse rounds. She shot back. At the close range, her pulses should have had an effect, but the assailants' suits appeared unmarked. Her own was already growing hot from the hits she was receiving. There was no cover in the open passageway. Unless she ordered the computer to open the emergency seals, depressurizing the ship and allowing the attackers more access, the fighting would end here, one way or another. She gave the command to fall back. The attackers moved forward with practiced ease, a tidal wave of firm intent. The passageway was alive with pulse fire as brilliant bolts of energy flashed. More attackers appeared behind the first, ready to replace fallen comrades, but none fell. The mercs were hopelessly outclassed by the superior tech. A merc beside Carina collapsed, her suit smouldering. Comms from Rees and Bryce sounded in her helmet. At their sights the experience was the same. The enemy's assault was powerful, relentless, and overwhelming. It was time to surrender or die fighting. The decision was made. "This is it," she said over comm. "Drop your weapons." Chapter 5. The journey down to the planet was bumpy and uncomfortable. They'd been herded directly onto steel containers inside the enemy ship, and after many hours without food, water, or toilet breaks, the containers were lifted onto space-to-surface transports. What followed was the worst flight Carina had ever experienced. The planet's atmosphere seemed highly turbulent as they were buffeted and jerked every which way, thrown into each other and the steel walls, before a heavy impact brought an end to the trip and their suffering. Chertang and several mercs had upchucked on the way down, leaving Carina dangerously close to vomiting too. She hoped the kids, Ava, and the newborn babe's travel experience had been smoother. Bolts rattled in their mountings, and the opening end of the container fell outward, slamming to the ground. A heavy cloud of dust swirled in, instantly choking her. Curses and coughing filled the space. The air holding the dust was frigid and dry. Lights penetrating it seemed artificial, coming from several sources rather than the sky. They had to be outdoors, so perhaps it was night-time. Men and women in fatigues, their faces enclosed in masks and breathing gear, lurched from the gloom, yelling. Their facial coverings made their words indistinct, but the meaning behind the movement of their rifles was clear. Bruised, tired, thirsty and hungry, Carina stumbled with the others toward the exit. In her years as a merc visiting many worlds, she discovered each planet had its own subtle odor. Some smelled like malfunctioning sanitation systems, sulfuric compounds lacing the atmosphere. Others, heavily vegetated, held more pleasant scents that could only be described as variations of green. This world smelled acrid, as if its air was caustic. Was that the reason for the breathing apparatus? Did human lungs burn here? Soldiers ran behind them to haul the worst affected by the trip to their feet and force them out. More soldiers flanked her group on each side. They drove them down the shallow ramp created by the open side of the container. A gusting, moaning wind was lifting the dust. It swirled into her eyes and nostrils. She kept her mouth clamped shut and squinted. Barely able to breathe, let alone see, she gave up trying to survey her surroundings and focused on remaining upright. As Jackson had said, they had a long game to play. A patch of darkness loomed ahead. They were pushed toward it. After 15 or so meters of rocky ground, her feet met concrete on a downward incline. The wind eased and the darkness increased. The dust seemed to diminish. Overhead lights flicked on. They were inside a tunnel. Their guards closed in. The passage held 5 people walking abreast, 2 soldiers on the wings and 3 prisoners in the center. 3 captors walked in front. When she turned to see how the rest of her companions were faring, the guard nearest her poked her with his rifle. "Eyes forward!" She was startled. She had heard 2 voices. The one she understood had come from somewhere below his mouth, but the words from behind his mask were incomprehensible. He was using a translator. These people didn't speak universal. They walked deeper, lights activating as they approached. The wind died away completely, and along with it most of the dust, though the air remained hazy. A thick layer of fine particles covered the floor, piling up at the tunnel sides like snowdrifts. She was covered in the stuff too, and her eyes smarted as the gritty grains fell from her lashes. Another set of lights came on, revealing double doors ahead. As they approached, the doors rolled apart. They were forced into a large elevator, which descended for about 15 seconds. At the bottom they stepped into a brilliantly lit, bare space covered in clean white tiles, floor, walls and ceiling. "Strip," a soldier ordered via translator. "Put everything in the chutes." She cursed. She'd secreted elixir ingredients in her clothes, and so had her mage siblings, wherever they were. She slowly undressed, hoping for a chance of retaining 1 or 2 items. But their captors were adamant the prisoners removed every last piece of clothing. When everyone was naked, the soldiers filed out another door, and the chute snapped shut. Cold water erupted from nozzles in the ceilings and walls. She gasped and cursed again as the frigid liquid hit. There was no escaping it as it sluiced away the dust clinging to their skin. The dirty water disappeared down grills in the floor. Chertang said over the hiss from the nozzles and the complaints of the mercs, "I'm starting to regret my decision to join up with you guys." "I didn't think you were given much choice about it," Carina replied, her teeth chattering. "Well, that's right, but I thought I was onto a good thing. Now I'm not so sure." "Are they disinfecting us?" Vigo asked. "Is that what this is about?" "No idea," said Carina. "But one thing's clear. We're a hell of a way off the beaten track. They don't even know Universal." "They know it," said Vigo. "They just choose not to speak it." The spraying stopped, and the door the soldiers had vanished through opened. Beyond it was a second tiled room, but this looked dry and held clothes in piles on the floor. They filed through the opening, wet and cold. The clothes were all the same colour and style, plain yellow pants and shirts, but in different sizes. Along with the others, Carina sorted through the piles until she found garments that vaguely fit and put them on. They'd also been given sandals. "Haven't these people heard of underwear?" Chertang complained. "If no boxers are the worst of our troubles," said Vigo, "we'll be damned lucky." Carina squeezed the excess water from her hair and shivered as she fastened her shirt, wondering if Bryce and her family were being put through the same process. Their captors were treating them like cattle. "Welcome to Sot Loza," said a voice. A woman had entered the room. With her came warm air, wafting from the open doorway behind her. She wore a dark blue military uniform, and her hair was drawn up tightly in a bun. As with the soldiers, she spoke through a translator. "Some kind of welcome," Carina retorted. "What have you done with our clothes? Will we get them back?" "I'm Vice General Quesham. Your induction is over, and you're free to enter the city. You have freedom of movement within the city boundaries, but if you break any of our laws, you will lose that privilege. The laws, along with more details regarding your lives here, are posted at your lodgings, where I will now escort you." "What have you done with our stuff?" Carina demanded. "Why have you brought us here? Where are the other people from our ship?" "Come with me," said the Vice-General, turning. "You'd better not push it," said Vigo. Grumbling, Carina took his advice and followed Quesham with the others. She was growing deeply worried about her family. Darius and Nala were too young to deal with this shit. Even Oriana and Fern would be scared. The Vice-General led them down a passageway and then out into a general thoroughfare. The atmosphere was warm and the caustic scent of the surface barely noticeable. People streamed past in each direction, though the emergence of the yellow-clothed newcomers onto the street soon provoked a stir. The pedestrians slowed down or halted to stare. A multi-person transport drew up and parked. Smaller vehicles drove around it, though the passengers rubber-necked as they manoeuvred. "Get aboard!" Quesham barked. "Hurry up!" "Hey, beautiful!" a man yelled. "When you get out, call me. My number's—" He reeled off the digits. "Who's he talking to?" asked Chertang. "Me, of course," Vigo replied. Carina was studying the sky, or rather the ceiling of the underground city. It glowed a pale purple and wispy clouds moved across it. The effect was realistic. There was even a faint breeze, though she guessed from pumps that kept the air breathable, more than an attempt to mimic an outdoor environment. "You!" Quesham snapped at her. "Move it!" The others were aboard the transport. She climbed the step into the vehicle and took an empty seat next to a window. First, she had to find her brothers and sisters and Bryce and the rest of the Bathsheba's personnel. Then she had to work out the escape plan. Chapter 6. Outsiders are bound by all Sotlozer's laws. In addition, outsiders must not leave their city's boundaries. Outsiders must not wear any other clothing than their uniform. Outsiders must not fraternize with anyone below managerial caste. Outsiders must not take employment. Outsiders must not participate in activities that risk harm to their persons. Outsiders must eat and exercise regularly to maintain good health. The notice hung on the wall in the lobby of the single-story building where Quesham had offloaded them. "We have to eat and exercise and not do anything risky," said Vigo. "Weirdest rules for prisoners I've ever seen." "We're not prisoners," Chertang corrected. "We're outsiders." Carina was trying to figure out the rules too. The most alarming was the edict to not leave their city's boundaries. Why not this city's boundaries? Did it mean some captives from the Bathsheba were being held elsewhere? Had they been taken to different locations all over the planet? It was a scenario they hadn't anticipated, yet it made sense. Separating the new prisoners by thousands of kilometers made them easier to control. Her group only numbered 12 people, far too few to stage an escape attempt. The requirement to always wear their uniforms also made sense. They would stand out like beacons among the general populace. What about the rules they mustn't get a job or fraternize with the lower classes? Was it because the poorer locals might help them? Her biggest question was, why had they been brought here in the first place? The Sotlozans had gone to an awful lot of trouble to get them to their planet. If seizing the Bathsheba had been their only motivation, it would have been safer to kill her crew, not take them prisoner. There was always the chance they would try to get their ship back. The Black Dogs wouldn't disappoint the Sotlozans in that regard. Their new quarters consisted of a dormitory, communal washroom, refectory, gym, storage closet containing additional yellow uniforms and bedding, a laundry, and a room for leisure activities. The last held working interfaces, but they couldn't use them. The spoken and written languages were not universal, nor any other language or dialect familiar to Carina or her companions. The first facility she'd looked for was a kitchen, but there was none. It was the most important room if she was to create elixir. She could have used the heat source to set something alight. Naked flames and wood were going to be the hardest elixir elements to come by. She left the lobby, returned to the dormitory, and flumped onto a bed. "Hey, that's mine!" Chertang protested, following her into the room. Scowling, she replied, "Does it matter?" "It does to me." She found another bed, this time near a window looking out onto a paved yard a few meters square. The surrounding buildings were only 2 floors high. She guessed the fake sky wasn't far above them. The windows of the residence weren't barred and no guards stood outside. They were free to come and go as they pleased. "Who wants to go and explore?" she asked the room generally. "Not me," Chertang replied. "I'm exhausted. I'm gonna get some sleep, so I'd appreciate a little quiet in here." The Black Dogs had been doing their usual thing, bantering, slamming into things, and shoving each other around. At Chertang's complaint, they quietened down somewhat, but threw him dark looks. Trouble lay ahead if he didn't stop his whining. Carina couldn't find a shit to give. He was getting on her nerves too. "I'll go with you," Vigo said. They stepped out onto the thoroughfare. This place wasn't as busy as the spot where the transport had picked them up. They were on a long, straight road that stretched out of sight in both directions. The surrounding buildings seemed to be workplaces rather than habitations. Their blank, featureless facades dotted the roadway, where vehicles flew past at high speeds. The same lilac sky as before hung overhead, and she could have sworn the same clouds floated across it, as if playing in a loop. The ceiling couldn't be far overhead, but she wasn't sure how deep underground they were. The elevator that had brought them to this level hadn't travelled a long time. "Wondering how to get up on top?" asked Vigo. "If you had your special liquid, we could do it." Was he being serious? "Don't be dumb. We'd only find ourselves back where we were before, and we'd die there pretty quick." "If it's all the same on the surface, maybe. But we don't know that. We only saw one area, and they might have picked it intentionally to give us a certain impression." "I didn't think of that." "Something to think about. Which way are we going?" She shrugged. "The direction we came from, I guess." The ground was bedrock, grey and flat, except for tiny grooves where the burrowing machine had cut into it. The same bedrock rose up beyond the buildings. The tunnel seemed to be about 100 meters wide. Somewhere toward the top of its walls, the rock's appearance turned hazy and faded into sky. As they walked, Carina marvelled at the feat of engineering the Sotlosans had performed in creating their underground world. "Have you ever seen or heard of anything like this?" "Never. Not in my sector or yours." "The surface has to be uninhabitable all over, or else why would they have gone to all this trouble?" Before Vigo could answer, a vehicle braked hard, pulled off the road and parked. A woman got out, wearing a fine-textured light blue pantsuit and shiny black shoes. Short, dark brown hair framed her face. She appeared older than Carina, but not by much, maybe mid-20s. She spoke, but unintelligibly. After taking in their expressions, she lifted a finger as if asking them to wait, and then ran back to her vehicle. When she returned, she wore a small black cube on a choker. "Sorry, you're new, right?" "If you mean have we been dragged across space," Carina replied. "Light years off our route, taken prisoner, forced down to your planet, and are being held captive? That's right, we're new." The woman gave an awkward cough and murmured, "I thought so. Can I give you a ride somewhere?" "Where do you suggest we go?" Carina asked. "If you can take us back to our ship, that would be great. This area's only just been developed. There isn't a lot to do or see. I thought you might want to go into town." "I appreciate the offer," Vigo said, "but it would be more helpful if you could explain to us exactly what's going on." "Yeah," Carina echoed. "Why have we been brought here, and when will we be released? When will we get our ship back?" "You're kidding, right?" the woman retorted. "You're here to stay. You aren't going anywhere." She turned to Vigo. "Are you sure I can't show you around?" Throughout the conversation she'd been focused mostly on him, and now she looked expectantly at him for an answer. When he looked at Carina for her input, irritation flickered over the woman's face. "It's up to you what you do," Carina said. "But from our experience so far, I don't trust any of them. I'm not getting in her car." "I wasn't asking you," the woman spat. "I'm sticking with my friend," said Vigo. "Certain." She sighed and reached into her pocket. Pulling out a card, she gave it to Vigo, saying, "You can reach me here any time, okay?" Bemused, he took it. Carina stared. Damn, she really wanted to spend time with him, a complete stranger and newcomer to her world. The woman left, giving a final disappointed backward glance before climbing into her vehicle and speeding away. Vigo held up the card to read it. The material was wrinkled and dog-eared, as if it had been in the woman's possession a long time. "It's in universal script," Carina remarked. The information on it was scant. All it stated was a name, Hedron Mafmi, and a 9-digit number. "One thing's for sure," she added. "You have a fan." And by fan, she meant potential co-conspirator. Chapter 7. "This is it," said Carina over comm. "Drop your weapons." Bryce slung his rifle over his back and raced from the airlock. As well as a general command, her words were a signal to him in particular. He had to make his way to the suite where her family and the Marchonish woman, Ava, had sheltered while the battle for the ship raged. The decision to separate Carina from her siblings when the Bathsheba inevitably fell into enemy hands had been a hard one to make. After hours of argument, the consensus had been if they were going to be captured, they had to split up the mages. The children were too young to be parted from each other, but Carina working on her own would double the opportunities to use their powers. As well, if one mage's abilities were revealed, Carina or the children's might remain secret a while longer. Now the kids, Ava and her baby, were Bryce's responsibility. He had to stick with them at all costs and do his best to protect them from whatever their attackers had in mind. The door to the suite was already open. Inside, Parthenia and the children bustled about, packing bags. In the midst of them, Ava stood, clutching the swaddled babe, her eyes wide and frightened. Parthenia halted and stared. "We've surrendered already." "Don't worry, everything's going as planned." "I still think we should have fought," said Fern. "To the bitter end if necessary. We mages could inflict a lot of damage before they took us out." "And that's precisely why you aren't in charge of battle strategy," Oriana chided. "What's the point of fighting until everyone's killed? What good would that do?" "Some things are worse than dying. Remember the Regian planet?" "Shh!" Parthenia put a finger to her lips and nodded at Darius. "We don't need reminding of unpleasant times." Darius said, "I remember the Regians just as much as you do. And Poppy. Poppy was nice." Poppy was the name he'd given the creature who had helped them escape the timeshifters. If the animal was his main memory of their time with the Regians, who used humans as hosts for their eggs, he was lucky. "The boarders will be here soon," Parthenia said. "Do we have everything?" "I have everything I need," said Fern, tapping the bottle of elixir on his hip. "Don't make a show of it," Parthenia warned. "Remember what we agreed?" Darius held up a hold-all. "I have my bag." "Me too," said Nala. "Then we're all set." She moved next to Ava and beckoned the others to do the same. She was pale and her expression grim. The sound of pounding booted feet echoed down the passageway. "They're coming," said Bryce. "Get ready." He waited, peeking from the cover of the doorway, the muzzle of his rifle aimed in the direction of the approaching soldiers, silently praying that Jackson's hunch was right and their attackers didn't want to kill them all. If Jackson was wrong, Carina might already be dead. He swallowed. If the hostiles were planning on a massacre, he hoped he wouldn't live to see. A figure rounded the corner. Like the ones Bryce had fought at the airlock, the soldier was heavily armoured, and his visor allowed no glimpse of his face. Bryce aimed and fired. The pulse round hit, but washed over the boarder's chest armour like a wave washing over a rock, except it left no trace. As he ducked back into the doorway, a round exploded on the frame. "Be careful, Bryce!" Parthenia exclaimed. "Stay back. and when they come, don't put up any resistance." He dipped into the passageway again. Instantly, a round grazed his helmet. He moved his head behind the frame and fired blindly. He had glimpsed 3 soldiers. The first was only meters away. He tossed his rifle to the deck and raised his hands over his head. Taking a breath, he stepped out, but the attackers were primed to shoot. He took 3 or 4 rounds at nearly point-blank range. His armor couldn't cope. Heat blazed onto his skin. In agony, he dropped to his knees and fell onto his front, redoubling the pain of his wounds. He writhed onto his back. "Bryce!" Parthenia screamed. Vaguely, he registered a kick. Someone took his rifle. Then the soldiers stomped past him and into the suite. There were more of them now, 8, 9. They ignored him. By chance he could see into the room and watched helplessly as the soldiers rounded up the kids. They grabbed their bags and threw them against the bulkhead, their contents spilling out. Ava was weeping. Darius's lower lip trembled, but he was holding up. That poor kid had been through so much. Nala glared at their captors defiantly as they forced the group toward the exit. No sound came from the soldiers as they ushered the children and Ava away. Everything was done by gesture, but no doubt they spoke to each other via internal comm. From the way their heads moved and their gait, they seemed pleased to have discovered the kids. They were so pleased, in fact, they almost forgot him. The group had reached the corner when one ran back to where Bryce sprawled in pain. He grasped Bryce's arm and tried to pull him to his feet. Bryce gasped in agony, but the soldier had no mercy. He kicked his thigh and pulled harder on his arm. Somehow Bryce managed to heave himself upright. He had to stay with the kids and Ava. He stumbled forward, hunched over, and followed the path the others had taken. They headed for the airlock he'd been helping to defend and which the boarders had destroyed. The section had depressurized, and the kids weren't wearing suits. How were the enemy planning on getting their captives through the airless space? But when he reached the area, his HUD told him it had breathable atmosphere. The airlock hatch, severed from its surround, lay on the deck, an oblong hole with melted edges where it had once stood. The children and Ava were not here. They'd been taken onto the enemy ship. He hobbled faster to try to catch up to them. The far side of the airlock was a gaping hole, and beyond it stretched a steel walkway. A rigid umbilicus led to the enemy vessel. At the end, a huddled group was surrounded by soldiers, Ava and the kids. He upped his pace, gritting his teeth against the pulsing agony of his chest and stomach. He wanted to call out to them and tell them he was coming, but he couldn't. The group moved away to the right, guided by their captors. When he reached the same spot, his guard pushed him to the left. "No," he grunted, trying to follow the children and Ava. His guard blocked him and shoved him backward with 2 hands against his chest. Bryce collapsed. The pain was too great. He pointed in the direction the children had gone. The soldier slapped his hand away and pointed left. His shoulders sagging, Bryce shook his head. His captor snapped the neck seals on Bryce's armor open and wrenched off his helmet. He looked up and blinked as the cool air chilled his sweat. The black visor confronted him. The soldier barked a command and pointed again. He couldn't understand the words, but he knew the meaning. "I have to stay with." The guard jabbed his rifle into his chest. He cried out, "I get it." With great effort, he staggered to his feet. He had to follow the order. He would be no use to the kids and Ava if he was dead. His heart heavy, he shuffled off to the left, hoping he could find the others later. Chapter 8. The transport had returned. It pulled up outside the centre and parked, visible from the refectory window. Carina and the others had gathered in the room, hoping to be fed, but no evening meal had materialised. Instead, it looked like they were being taken somewhere. "Should we just get aboard?" asked Chertang. "No way," said one of the black dogs, a woman called Pamuk. "Who knows where it'll take us?" Vigo suggested, "I don't think we're going to eat unless we board that thing." "That's the message I'm getting too," said Carina. Chertang was already on his way out. His physique was on the chunky side and he loved his food. "Man's stomach's gonna lead him to his grave," said Pamuk. "You're right," Carina agreed, "but I'm hungry too." She followed Chertang. Another motivator was the hope she might see Bryce and her siblings. In the end, everyone boarded. It was only then the transport departed. Carina and Vigo had discovered on their excursion that their residence was a long way from anywhere useful. After walking for an hour, they didn't come across any place where they could find out more about Sot Loza or how they might get off it. Their residence was in an area that effectively cut them off from most of the population. The only moments of interest after meeting Hedron Mafmi were the appearance of workers at the windows of buildings. The Sot Lozans pressed their faces against the glass and watched as they walked by. But no one approached. Perhaps the people were not managerial class. The vehicle set off in the opposite direction from their arrival, zooming down the long straight road. No side roads appeared. The new area was as bare and featureless as the section Carina and Vigo had walked. Above, the purple sky faded to twilight and fake stars slowly shone out. "They've gone to a lot of trouble," said Vigo, jerking his chin toward the display. "To make it look realistic?" asked Carina. "Yeah, they want the illusion of living up top. But if they can't live on the surface, what do they do for food? Sot Loza is a way off the trade routes. They can't import it." "I guess we're about to find out." The artificial twilight deepened as the vehicle took them to their mysterious destination. Lights winked on in the distance, and shadowy constructions reared up from the drab landscape. The vehicle stopped at the edge of an unfamiliar metropolis. The wide tunnel opened out further, accommodating streets and houses, anonymous in the darkness. More light shone from the windows of the habitation they'd parked outside. At the top of the steps stood a familiar figure, Quesham. Her hands were clasped behind her back, and she gazed on them with a supercilious air as they climbed up to meet her. "Go inside. You can eat and socialise." "Socialise? But I'm not dressed for a party," Carina muttered to Vigo. "Me neither. My beard's a mess." The room dedicated to the soiree sat directly beyond the open doors. 4 long tables had been arranged in a quadrangle with gaps at the corners to allow passage for automated servers. Sparkling chandeliers hung from the high ceiling, and the chairs and table decorations were rich and sumptuous. Most seats were already filled by men and women in fine-textured, intricately patterned clothes. The yellow suits of the prisoners looked ridiculously out of place. "Exactly 1 space for each of us," noted Pamuk. 12 chairs were empty, randomly scattered among the Sot Lozans. "This must be what Quesham meant by socialising," Carina commented. "We have to pay for our supper with witty conversation." "They'll be lucky," Pamuk said. "I never met a witty black dog." Chertang set off for the nearest seat, saying, "I don't care what they want, I'm hungry." As he sat down, he was greeted in a friendly manner by his neighbours, as if he had turned up to a regular dinner party. Vigo asked, "What choice do we have except to go with it?" He left to find a seat too. Carina pulled out a chair between a man and a woman. The woman wore a long pale blue gown that draped from her shoulders. Her jet black hair hung loose down her back, and a silver tiara held it away from her face. When Carina took the seat next to her, she grimaced and looked away. The man held out his hand. "Rano Shelter." He was black-haired too, strong-jawed and attractive in his pale grey tailored suit. She stared at the outstretched palm, her mind thrown back to Ostalon, where she'd discovered the true star map to Earth. In her earliest days on the planet, she'd been forced to attend a similar event held by Langley Dirksen, matriarch of the evil clan. She smiled, recalling her outrageous behaviour, stealing drinks and sweeping dishes from tables, furious at the coercion and her captivity. She had tempered since then, matured maybe. She had no urge to disrupt this party, regardless of how much she hated it, though the temptation to punch Rano Shelter in the face was strong. But that would get her nowhere. She shook his hand. "Carina." His startled smile of pleasure was interesting. What was he hoping from this encounter? "Welcome to Sot Loza. What would you like to eat? I can recommend the—" "You're speaking universal. I didn't think anyone could around here." His smile widened. "I took classes. I hope I'm easy to understand and my accent isn't too strong." "It's fine. What were you saying about the food?" "Ah, yes." He lifted a container and moved it next to her plate before removing the lid. "Try this. It's a fungus, rare even on Sot Loza. Fried in this way, it's delicious." Dubiously, Carina stuck a fork in a slice and transferred it to her plate. "Is that all you guys eat? Fungus?" "We eat a wide range of food. You'll be surprised at what lives down here naturally, and what we're able to grow. Take this, for example." He took the lid off another dish, revealing a lumpy yellow substance. "Can you guess what it is?" She raised her eyebrows. "Eggs?" "We call it Seprex. It's made from bacteria." Okay." In response to her reaction, he added, "It's surprisingly tasty. Would you like to try some?" "I think I'll stick with the fungus for now, thanks." She cut a piece and ate it. Her stomach was crying out for food, even though everything was unfamiliar. Not bad. She swallowed her mouthful and cut another piece. "Do you all live underground?" "That's correct." "So the conditions on the surface are the same all over the planet?" "With some variation. On this continent." The woman to Carina's right had turned to glare at him, causing his words to peter out. "On this continent what?" Carina asked. "What were you about to say?" He cleared his throat. "Conditions are particularly bad. The surface of Sot Loza is entirely uninhabitable. Tell me about your world. Where are you from?" Nowhere you would have heard of. Other conversations were taking place around them. Low, murmured exchanges, as if the situation was completely normal and ordinary. The only remarkable thing about the scene was the yellow punctuation among the range of rich dinner party garments. "Look," Carina said to Rano, "I know you aren't going to tell me, but I have to ask anyway. What the hell is going on?" He shifted as if uncomfortable. "Let's just enjoy the evening. You must be hungry after your long journey. Are you sure you wouldn't like to try some Seprex?" "Maybe later." As the dinner progressed, she exhausted all the tactics that came to mind to get Rano to talk. She grew angry, she wheedled, she gave him the silent treatment. Nothing worked. He and the rest of the Sot Lozans appeared determined to maintain their masquerade. It was only when she used the restroom she received the merest hint of a clue about what was happening and the Sot Lozans' intentions. A human attendant staffed the room. The woman in a dark grey uniform stepped forward to wash Carina's hands. In shock at the unusual treatment, she allowed the attendant to apply soap and water. As she dried her hands, the woman leaned closer and whispered, "It's better to go along with it and not ask too many questions. Life down here isn't too bad. You'll get used to it in the end." She took a step back and nodded, signalling her service was over. Carina returned to her seat, trying to figure out what had just happened. What did the attendant's words mean? Had she been a prisoner too, dragged to Sotloza from a far-distant sector? And was she now indoctrinated into the system, accepting her fate? If washing people's hands was what her future held, Carina would have no part of it. She sat down, and Rano pushed a dessert dish toward her. "Try this. It's a delicacy, usually only available at banquets." She eyed the pink gloop, no doubt another bacterial sludge. "I'm not eating your shitty slime. Tell me what's happening here. Why have you brought me and my companions to Sotloza? Tell me what this is about." He had the decency to look abashed. Leaning in, he murmured, "In time, all will become clear. I cannot reveal any more. I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't cut it. You've diverted our ship, taken her from us, and now you plan on keeping us captive for the rest of our lives. You might as well have spaced us." "Oh, come on. It isn't so A gob of pink slime hit him in the face, splashed up by the serving spoon Carina had thrown in the dish. A dull thud sounded, accompanied by a gasp of shock. Pamuk, who sat opposite, had landed a punch on her neighbour's jaw. He crashed to the floor, still in his seat. The blow triggered an eruption. Someone screamed. The black dogs were suddenly on their feet and attacking the Sotlozans. They punched, choked and grappled with the diners, lifting them from their seats and throwing them down before kicking and stomping on them. It was pandemonium, a riot of violence and pain. Rano's head jerked to face Carina's, the whites of his eyes showing. He got to his feet and slowly backed away, hands raised. But she only stood up and separated herself from the action. Vigo and Chertang also elected to not join the brawl. The Sotlozans didn't stand a chance. Though they outnumbered their guests, they weren't fighters. Crying out, groaning and screeching, they suffered the onslaught as guards poured in and dragged the mercs off them. The polished tiles were slick with blood. Bones had been broken. The diner's fine jewellery sparkled on the floor. What had they expected would happen? You couldn't deprive a bunch of trained soldiers of their freedom and expect them to take it sitting down. Chapter 9. Earth, metal, water, wood and fire, Carina repeated. The list was only 5 items long, yet 2 of her companions seemed to be struggling with it. Wood? Chertang asked. Like from a tree? Yes, she snapped. Like from a tree. Come on, guys, said Vigo. It isn't that hard. They were outside, though near their residence, where they'd been dropped off after the dinner party. Most of the mercs had been hauled off somewhere. Only Pamuk had escaped the punishment, whatever it was, as she had come to her senses after punching her neighbour and stopped her attack. Rather than going inside immediately the transport left, the 4 had walked a short distance down the road. "But where the hell are we going to get wood around here?" asked Pamuk. Carina sighed and slapped a hand to her face. "That's the problem. And it isn't only not having wood that's an obstacle to making elixir. I don't know if I can make a fire." "If we had some wood," Chertang speculated, "we could—" "That's kinda my point. Hear me out. Doesn't have to be wood. Any flammable material will do. If we short some wiring to make it spark, I can start a fire that way. It was the first useful thing she had heard him say. Even with a fire, we still need wood, Pamuk muttered. I bet it doesn't even grow on this planet. We'll never find any down here. I brought some with me, Carina said, but it was in the clothes I was wearing when we were captured.
That we had to throw away,
Vigo said.
So if we find out where they put them...
Carina shook her head, like they're going to tell us. They want us to wear these banana suits.
Did your brothers and sisters have elixir ingredients with them too?
And bottles of elixir. But if they were treated the same as us, they don't have them anymore. Anxiety and fear gnawed at her. Would she ever see her siblings or Bryce again? She forced the feelings down. She had been separated from her family before, but they'd found each other. They could do it again.
One thing's for sure. We aren't going to find out where to get some wood by cutting ourselves off from the Sotlozans. That event they made us go to tonight, it had a purpose, even if they wouldn't explain it. If the black dogs hadn't started that brawl...
Ha! Pamuk interjected. More like a massacre.
If they hadn't started that fight, we might have discovered something useful.
No way, Carina said. The guy I was with wouldn't drop a hint. Didn't matter what I said.
Well, I thought I was getting somewhere with my neighbour until a black dog broke her arm. I'm pretty sure that soured our relationship. Still, you can catch more Cultrees with Ninery than Jardonic.
Carina stared. You what? I understand, said Chertang. You get what you want by being nice, not nasty.
Something like that.
Pamuk shook her head. Being nice isn't a black dog's strong suit.
Then they'll have to try.
One thing they hadn't realised at first was that they had a comm panel on the wall of the dormitory. It was a simple device, just a screen. Everyone had assumed it was an interface like the ones in the social area, and so useless unless you knew the local language. Then, out of idle curiosity, the morning after the dinner party fracas, Vigo read Hedran Mafmi's number into it. Carina was lying on her bunk, watching. Seconds later, the blank screen was replaced by Hedran's face, wreathed in a smile. Vigo started with surprise. She reached for something off-screen and then hung her translator around her neck. Great to hear from you. You decided to take me up on my offer to show you around?
He
glanced at Carina.
Can my friend come along?
Hedran's face fell. It would be cosier with just the two of us.
I'm not looking for cosy. I'd prefer it if Carina came with us. If you're not up for that, then...
Sure, Hedran blurted. Your friend is very welcome. Her expression said otherwise. They arranged a time for her to meet them outside, and Vigo cut the comm. Carina raised herself up onto her elbows. Of all the scenarios I imagined I might face after being taken prisoner, I never thought I would be third wheel on a date.
Is that what it is?
What do you think? She has designs on you. He gazed at his reflection in the screen and smoothed his beard.
That's understandable.
Carina chuckled. Not saying you're ugly or anything, but the Sotlozans seem to have designs on all of us. That's what last night was about. The guy I was with was trying to get me to like him. This whole situation is bizarre. We've been brought here to form romantic relationships with the locals. Why can't they get things going with each other?
Maybe their religion forbids it.
Then it's the dumbest religion in existence, and it would have died out before it even started.
That's all I've got. My new girlfriend might shed some light. I'm guessing I'd better not tell her I prefer men.
Carina guffawed. No, you'd better not. The sound of a vehicle pulling up broke through the quiet hum of traffic. Pamuk called from the refectory, where she and Chertang were still eating the breakfast that had mysteriously arrived overnight. They're back! The black dogs who had been detained at the dinner party stepped into the building looking tired but unhurt. They'd been held in cells, they said, and forced to sleep on the floor, but no worse punishments had befallen them.
Not much of a deterrent against doing it again,
Vigo commented. No, Carina agreed. But what would be the point? We can't punch our way out of this place. There are a hell of a lot more Sotlosans than us. We need firepower, but I haven't seen any civilians carrying weapons, and the soldiers aren't going to give up theirs without a fight.
If you and your siblings could use your talents, that'll help.
Yeah, assuming we conquer the problem we talked about last night and we can find them. Even then it'll be tricky. The mercs had spied the food packages in the refectory. In another second they'd piled into the room and begun to devour them.
On the other hand,
said Vigo,
we could out-eat our captors and starve them to death.
The vehicle that had brought the black dogs back pulled away, and its place was taken by Hedron's conveyance. She climbed out, peered through the open doorway and waved at Vigo. She's keen. Hedron Mafmi wore a pink dress patterned with silver swirls. It wrapped around her waist and clung to her figure flatteringly. She'd gone to some effort with her hair too, shaping the layers and bringing the front section to 2 points, accentuating her cheekbones. Her face was made up. Smudged dark grey lines defined her eyes, and a darker shade of pink than her dress emphasised her lips. Considering all her work was wasted on Vigo, Carina felt a little sorry for her. He took the front passenger seat while she was assigned the lesser position in the rear. Expecting to be ignored for the duration of the trip, she focused on the exterior to see what else she could learn about Sotlosa. Hedron took them in the same direction they'd gone for the dinner party. Now it was daytime, the sky was replaying. Did the people responsible for it ever vary the display or the ambient temperature, giving the underground world the appearance of seasons? The same conditions all the time would get boring fast.
This area seems empty, said Vigo. Is it new?
You're a smart guy, Hedron replied. That's right. This section was tunnelled a couple of years ago to join Laft, the town where you arrived, with Sarnak, the place where I'm taking you. Before this section was opened, travelling between Laft and Sarnak took 2 hours.
Is Sarnak connected to the surface too?
No, just Laft. She paused. I know what you're doing. You're trying to figure out ways to escape. I know it's hard for you right now, but you have to forget about it. Even if you made it to an elevator, it wouldn't work for you. And if it did, you wouldn't last more than a few hours up top. It's unlivable up there. You can't see more than a few meters, and the air fries your lungs. If you survived long enough to steal a shuttle to take you to your ship, you could never board it. We have hundreds of people on it, and they would kill you. Escaping from Sotlosa is a suicide mission. She might have been trying to put them off, but in doing so she was giving useful information. Vigo said,
It might make our fate easier to swallow if we knew why we're here.
I can't tell you that. All I can say is, it'll become clear over time.
In that case, what can you tell us? Do Sotlosans have a list of permitted subjects to discuss with outsiders?
I can tell you our history if you're interested.
I'd love to hear it.
Our ancestors arrived on a colony ship like yours roughly 1400 years ago, standard. While most of the colonists were in deep sleep, there was an accident. According to the log, the ship collided with an astronomical body of some kind. The data was incomplete. Whatever it was, it cut across and through the shielding on the fuel tanks, and as the pressurized fuel vented, the force pushed us way off course. We sent out a mayday, but no one answered, unsurprisingly. We were far from any inhabited systems. As Hedron had been speaking, a built-up area had come into view. The low buildings spread out as far as Carina could see. The Sot Lozans had been busy over the last 400 years. The skeleton crew awake at the time of the collision managed to seal the many leaks, but only a little fuel remained, not enough to return the ship to her course or take her to inhabited regions. They had no choice but to remain on the new heading and hope to reach a habitable planet before the chemicals and power keeping everyone in deep sleep alive ran out. Their chances were slim, but as luck would have it, they came close enough to Sot Loza's system to use the remaining fuel to slow the ship down and achieve orbit. Vigo said,
"And I guess that, being a colony vessel, they were set up to survive a few years while they figured out a way to live here."
She nodded. Despite the earlier misfortune, destiny seemed to have a hand to play in ensuring our presence on Sot Loza. "Destiny?" Carina piped up. "Does your survival really mean anything? If your ancestors hadn't survived, no one would be here to tell the tale. And in this galactic dead zone, no one would ever find your planet or any evidence of a failed colonization." Though Hedron had her back to her, Carina felt her scowl. Without turning round, she said, "There are many of us who believe there's a deeper purpose to our existence on Sot Loza. I wouldn't go around voicing your opinion on the matter if I were you." Vigo gave a small cough. Carina sighed, silently cursing her own big mouth. So much for turning Hedron into a co-conspirator. Chapter 10. Bryce snapped his eyes open and sat bolt upright. He was on a bed in a small bare room, and the door was closing. He leapt up to try to catch it, but blackness closed in, and his head felt light. He crumpled to the floor, hitting his knees on the hard tile. The door slid shut. Wincing, he shook his head to clear it. When his consciousness fully returned, he got to his feet and stepped to the door. It was locked. As he'd suspected as soon as he'd come around, he was being held prisoner. He touched his chest. His armoured suit was gone, and he was wearing a hospital gown. His burns seemed to have healed. The tile was icy cold under his bare feet. After trying the door a couple more times, he climbed back into bed. What had happened? As he recalled being separated from Carina's family, anxiety hit him. Were they okay? He hoped the people of this planet were treating the children kindly. He remembered stumbling through the enemy ship, being forced along by a soldier until he reached the shuttle bay. He was pushed into a container holding the other mercs on his team. A seemingly endless journey full of pain followed. They must have landed, but he had no memory of it or anything else. The enemy had fixed him up. Jackson's guess that they didn't want to kill them had been correct. So what did they want? He padded across to the door once more and pressed an ear to it. Either the room was soundproofed or absolute silence reigned outside. He thumped it with a fist. "Hey, let me out! What have you done with the children from the ship? I demand to see them! Hey, answer me!" Nothing. He marched to the opposite side of the room and slammed his hands on the wall. Jackson had said they had to take things step by step, but that had included him staying with the kids. Things had started to go wrong already. He had to get back to them. From behind him came the sound of the door opening. He rushed over to it, but halted in surprise when he saw who entered. It was the Marchonish woman, Ava, with her little one. As soon as she had slipped in, the door slid shut. "Bryce," she said softly, "are you better?" "Yeah, I'm fine. What are you doing here? What's happening?" "The guard said I can only stay a few minutes. I just wanted to check up on you. I insisted on seeing you, but they won't allow me to stay long. I'll tell the children you're okay. They're so worried about you." "You're with the kids? Are they all right?" "They're fine, just upset. But they'll calm down when I tell them your wounds have been treated." "Can you tell them I'll get to them as soon as I can?" In his current situation there seemed little hope of that, but he wanted them to know he was trying. Of course, but... She looked up and around the room. He was aware of people listening in on their conversation too. Be careful. They told us you won't be allowed to stay with us. You're going to go wherever they took the rest of the black dogs, and from what we saw, they didn't treat them too kindly. I don't want you to get hurt again.
I hear you, but don't worry, and tell the kids not to worry about me. I've been through some tough times and managed to survive this far. If I'm going to be with the black dogs, I'll see Carina. Together we'll be able to figure something out.
He didn't want to say more. It was important their captors didn't know Carina and the children were related. The door opened and a guard stuck his head in.
Time's up,
Ava said sadly. I have to go.
Take care and tell the kids not to worry.
She kissed his cheek. As she stepped through the open doorway, the guard moved out of her way. He was alone again, but his solitude didn't last long. A couple of moments later, the door opened again and a set of clothes was thrown in.
Get dressed!
Bryce barely had time to don the grey garments and boots before the guard reappeared and ordered him out. He complied, the coarse material of his new clothes already making his skin itch. The boots were too large, causing him to shuffle. A second guard waited outside. One in front and one following, they led him along the passageway and down some stairs. The rooms they passed weren't like his. There were windows in the doors, and, from the interiors he glimpsed, they held medical equipment and interfaces. He even spied decorative pictures on the walls. As they neared a door, it opened, and a medic walked out. She froze as she spotted him and his guard and ducked her head. Her expression was a mixture of embarrassment and fear. He didn't know what to make of it. Was she scared of the guards or him? And what was she embarrassed about? They descended another set of stairs and then another. These steps circled a central open area. At the bottom stood a set of elevator doors. A guard pressed the button and they waited.
You're taking me to the dungeons?
Bryce quipped. Predictably, neither man answered. The elevator certainly seemed to go down a long way. He guessed they must have descended to the basement. When the doors opened, the chillier, damper atmosphere suggested he was correct. The light was dimmer down here too. 3 doors along the passageway the guards halted. One spoke into a security panel. The screen came alive, displaying the interior of a cell. The guard commanded the prisoner to move to the far wall. He or she must have complied because a moment later Bryce was thrust in so hard he fell to his bruised knees.
"Shit," said a voice. "I knew my living situation was too good to be true."
Bryce looked up.
"Of all the cellmates I could have picked, you'd be the last."
"Likewise." Reese grinned and held out a hand.
"Good to see you, kid."
Bryce took it, and the heavily muscled merc jerked him to his feet. He rotated his shoulder, checking it remained in its socket. The small room held 2 cots, and only one looked slept in. That's what the merc had meant about his living situation. He had had the cell to himself up until now. Bryce eyed the toilet in the corner. He and Reese were about to become intimately acquainted. Reese followed his gaze. "Yeah, I apologise in advance. I took a shot in the gut a few years back, and my bowels have never been the same." "Great." The merc was staring at his feet.
"Wanna try swapping boots? Mine have been pinching my toes like a bitch."
He sighed in pleasure as he tried on Bryce's. Bryce discovered Reese's footwear was somewhat moist, but it did fit him better. He took the boots off and put them under his bunk to air out.
"What's been happening? I don't remember much after being taken aboard the enemy ship. Have you seen Carina and the others? You don't remember arriving here? Well, that's no surprise. You were way out of it. There's not a lot to tell. We were taken underground and put in these cells, where we've been ever since. As far as I know, our team was kept together, but we didn't see anyone else from the Bathsheba. They seemed to be keeping us separate. Until you turned up, I was on my own."
Rhys stretched out on his cot and put his hands behind his head.
"We were taken underground. Conditions on the surface are shit. High winds, thick dust. Prisoners, move away from the door,"
a voice ordered from the speaker.
"Not again," Rhys complained. "They do this every time they want to come in here. Like I'm gonna jump 2 guards, put them both out of action, and break out of here all by myself. You want to try though, right? Admit it."
The voice repeated.
"Prisoners, move away from the door immediately."
The merc winked at him as he got to his feet. Bryce joined him on the far wall. When the guard appeared, he pointed at Rhys.
"You, come with me. You have to give a sample." "A sample of what?"
Rhys shrugged. Chapter 11. Carina poked her food with a fork. On her plate were some green beans, a grainy mash, and a square of an off-white spongy substance she guessed was more of Sotlosa's ubiquitous fungi. Were the other items actually what they appeared to be, or were they bacteria formed to give the right appearance? "What's wrong?" Hedron asked angrily. "Isn't our food good enough for you? Would you prefer something from a ship's printer?" "Gee," Carina muttered, digging her fork into her beans. "I was just wondering what it tasted like." "Well, now you'll find out." Carina chewed, rolling her eyes. Vigo had been doing a great job of making Hedron think he was interested in her, which was fantastic for the end purpose of squeezing out useful information. But at the same time her antipathy toward Carina had been honed. In ordinary circumstances she would have left the couple alone hours ago. But firstly, she had no way of getting back to the outsider's residence, and secondly, she wanted to use the opportunity to find out as much as she could about Sotlosa. Hedron had brought them to the restaurant after giving them a tour of Sarnak. The town reminded Carina of the place she'd grown up, though Sarnak was larger and less ramshackle. She guessed it was home to about 15,000 people. The low buildings appeared to squat under the overhanging sky. In the town of her childhood, poverty had prevented the constructions from being taller. Here the reason was lack of space. It must have been cheaper to hollow out the subsurface on the horizontal rather than vertical plane. Their host had shown them municipal centres built in a mildly interesting architectural style, food factories, entertainment venues with rudimentary sims, and a small park. Compared to Lakshmi Station, Sotlosa was laughably undeveloped if Sarnak was a typical example of life here. Hedron's pride as she took them on her tour was unfounded, but it was unlikely she'd ever seen anywhere else. Carina's heart had skipped a beat when she'd seen the trees in the park, but she'd quickly realised they couldn't be real. She had confirmed her suspicion by running a hand down a trunk and feeling the leaves. "They're artificial, of course," Hedron had said with a smirk. "How could plants grow down here?"
"With sufficient lighting they could," said Vigo. "Is energy in short supply?"
Hedron frowned as she replied, "We don't need plants." The Sotlosans couldn't be lacking a good source of energy. They needed plenty to create their underworld, and they'd built several starships as well as the behemoth that had dragged the Bathsheba. Plus, the attraction beam they sent across space would require vast amounts of power. Maybe it was only a case of prioritizing what was most important.
"Tell me," said Vigo, "do you ever go up to the surface?"
"Why would I do that? Didn't you get a taste of what it's like before you were brought down?"
"I guess I'm not used to the idea of living my entire life underground. I can't imagine it.
If you'd grown up here, you wouldn't find it so strange. Carina asked, "Do you have records of your ancestors' home planet? Do you know why they left?" She wondered if they'd come from Earth. The Sot Lozen's attraction beam had pulled the Bathsheba way off course, yet the rift was closer to Earth than her own sector and Ostalon, one of the first places mages had settled. "Environmental degradation," Hedron replied. "At least that's what the history vids say. Their world had frozen over. Though they could survive, conditions were tough and their lives were miserable. So they set out to find somewhere better. 1400 years ago?" Hedron nodded. "Why?" "It's not important. Mages had left Earth, as far as she could estimate, much earlier. With the effects of time dilation, it could have been eons ago. It was possible the planet had frozen over in the intervening time. If that was the case, going there would be pointless. What was your origin planet called?" "Lupa." "Lupa?" It didn't ring any bells. "You seem very interested in Sot Loza's past. We can talk about something else if you like. What other questions are you willing to answer? I mean, if you could let us know what this charade is about, that would be great." She grimaced. "You know the subject is out of bounds. Why can't you just be grateful I'm doing you this favour?" "You aren't doing me any favours," Carina retorted. "It's Vigo you want. A complete stranger you wanted to pick up from the side of the road like a stray animal."
"Take it easy. I'd like to think my charms are easy to spot, even from a distance."
Carina pushed her plate away, folded her arms and leaned back in her chair, biting her tongue. Her worries about her siblings and Bryce were gnawing at her, setting her on edge. It was hard not to get into an argument with Hedron. That was what Vigo's comment had been about. He was trying to defuse the situation. "You're right," said Hedron. "It is Vigo I want." She turned to him. "You're an intelligent man. I'll give it to you straight. If you want to prosper here, you'll have to ditch your old associates and align yourself with a local. I can introduce you to influential people, give you somewhere nice to stay and a good life. What do you say?"
"What do you expect in return?"
"Nothing at all, for now, except perhaps," she side-eyed Carina. "From now on we do things together, just you and me. I mean, it isn't like she's your girlfriend or anything, is she? She can't be. You must have better taste. I'm right here."
"Thank you for laying things out so plainly, Hedron. Now we all know where we stand. I'll give your proposal serious thought."
"That's all I ask. I'm sure you'll come to the right." Her hand flew to her ear, and as she listened, her expression changed from smug satisfaction to irritation. "I have to take you back to your residence immediately." "What a pity," said Carina. "I was having so much fun." Hedron was already on her feet. "Come with me." "What if we don't want to?" Carina asked. "What if Vigo and I want to hang around here a little while longer and smooch?" Vigo chuckled.
"We'd better go."
He asked Hedron,
"Is there a problem?"
"Something serious must be going down. The security chief is demanding your immediate return." The pillar of smoke was visible from kilometers away, except it wasn't exactly a pillar. The column only rose a short distance before billowing out sideways, drawn off by the air circulation system. Vehicles Carina presumed belonged to the security services blocked one lane of the road, and the traffic was backed up as it took turns to pass. By the time they reached the residence, flames flickered through the windows and fire was roaring. A fire truck was spraying foam on the conflagration, but to no apparent effect. As they drew closer, Carina spotted figures struggling. The security forces were tussling with the mercs, trying to force them into vehicles. The black dogs were putting up an excellent fight. Several officers were incapacitated, lying on the pavement or leaning on their vehicles. They seemed to be unarmed, relying on brute force rather than firepower. A losing tactic when it came to men and women who were used to fighting for their lives and fighting dirty too. They drew up and Hedron's car halted, her window opening. A man in uniform ran up. It was Rano's shelter from the dinner party.
Carina, you seem to be in a position of authority among your ship's personnel. Can you please come and speak to them? I need you to convince them to calm down and stop hurting my officers. I don't want to fire on them if I can avoid it.
You're the security chief?
We didn't get around to it when we talked, but yes, I am. If you could...
She climbed out of the vehicle. Chertang was the only person from the Bathsheba not engaged in a fight. Many black dogs were trading blows with 2 or 3 security officers at once. The refugee from Lakshmi stood apathetically to one side, his arms hanging loosely. He had a guilty air about him, but she had more important work to do before she could get to the bottom of it. "Hey guys!" she yelled, raising her arms over her head. "The fight's over!" Either no one heard, or they were all enjoying themselves too much to obey. "Guys!" she yelled louder. "Knock it off!" "Why?" Pamuk yelled back. "These assholes took our ship and won't let us go." A man barreled into her from behind and tried to get her into a bear hug. She reached back, grabbed him, hauled him up and over, and slammed him on the ground. "Yeah," Carina agreed, "but this isn't going to get you anywhere." "Doesn't have to," a merc commented, delivering a jab to an officer's face, causing his nose to spurt blood as the man staggered back. "Still feels good." Carina turned to Rano. "I don't know what you want me to say."
"Whatever it takes to make them stop. I really don't want anyone to get shot."
It was an odd statement coming from someone responsible for security, and whose men and women were getting the shit kicked out of them. She shrugged and tried again. "If you don't stop, they're gonna open fire. It's up to you." This seemed to penetrate. Most of the black dogs had taken a hit at some point in their careers, and they weren't wearing armoured suits. Firefights were a different matter from street brawls, and a merc who didn't understand that didn't live long. "All right," Pamuk said, kicking an officer's knee in frustration. "We'd better call it a day." Gradually, the merc stopped resisting. The Sotlosen security forces surrounded them, but appeared reluctant to approach. The black dogs rubbed their knuckles and rolled their necks. They were bloody and bruised, though not as bloody or bruised as the Sotlosens, but they seemed happy. "How did the fight start?" Carina asked Rano.
"When we spotted their residence was burning, we came here to take them somewhere safe. That's all we wanted to do, I swear."
Chapter 12. Their new accommodation was a 3-story hotel in Laft. It was basic, but better than the former place, which was now a charred, smoking skeleton. Here they were to share rooms in pairs. Most importantly, the hotel had a kitchen, though it was off-limits to outsiders. Apart from a handful of staff, they had the place to themselves. If the hotel had held Sotlosen guests, they'd been moved out before the prisoners arrived. They were also closer to the elevator to the surface, though the prospect of their escape and retaking of the Bathsheba seemed as remote as ever. The mercs had gone to be treated for the minor injuries they'd received in the dust-up, leaving Carina, Vigo and Chertang alone. Rano had left with the rest of the Sotlosens after thanking Carina for her help. "I did it for my people," she'd retorted, "not yours." It probably hadn't been the wisest thing to say, considering that getting closer to the security chief could help their cause, but his friendliness made her skin crawl. She preferred Sable Dirkson's frank hatred over these two-faced shitbags. As soon as he was gone, she took Chertang out into the crowded, noisy street. "What happened?" she asked, though she already had a good idea. "It was my fault," he readily admitted. "I was experimenting with the wiring, trying to see if I could start a fire for, you know." "And you were successful." "Too successful." His mouth turned down at the corners. "Things got a little out of hand." "Just a little. But don't feel too bad. No one got hurt." "The Sotlosen security officers did." "Yes, but they don't count. None of us got hurt. And you figured out something important. Do you think you could do it again?" He threw a glance at the hotel. "I don't see why not, assuming that place is set up the same. I won't let it get out of control next time." "You don't need to do anything yet, not until we have the missing ingredient." Vigo walked down the steps from the hotel and joined them.
"I was wondering where you two had gone."
"Just talking business."
"I thought so. I've been checking out our new place of abode. Did you spot the kitchen?"
"I did, but even if we could get in there, it's irrelevant now. Chertang was responsible for the fire at the other place." Vigo's eyebrows rose.
"I see. That throws a whole new light on everything."
"It makes sourcing the other material more important than ever." Carina felt she was on the cusp of a breakthrough. With Elixir, she could do so much to put a permanent end to the Sotlosen's control. "How did you leave things with your new girlfriend?"
"Easy there."
He grinned.
"I'm not the type of guy to rush anything. I like taking my time before making a commitment."
"You have a girlfriend?" Chertang asked.
"Already?"
"You don't? What do you think that dinner party the other night was about?" Light seemed to dawn in his eyes and his mouth fell open. Then he frowned. "Damn! I missed my chance." Vigo laid a friendly hand on his shoulder.
"Don't worry, I'm sure you'll have plenty more chances."
"Seriously," Carina said. "Did you arrange another time to meet up?"
"In between all the mayhem of the fire and the brawl, yeah, we did. But she hinted very heavily I should come alone, so it could be just us getting to know each other better."
"I'm hurt. I thought I'd made a new friend. When you see her, try to find out as much as you—"
"I get it. You don't need to spell it out. And you'll do the same with the security guy?"
"Rano."
"If that's his name. Of all the people you could have sat next to at that party, you picked the chief of security. You hit gold."
"I suppose I did." The thought of cuddling up to the Sotlosen wasn't appealing, but he was as likely as any of them to know where she might find some genuine wooden material. And he was definitely interested in her. One thing's for sure, they know where we are and who we're with at any time. As soon as the trouble with the black dogs kicked off, Hedron got a comm. Rano knew exactly where to find us. They probably know we're standing here in the street talking right now. Pedestrians regularly looked at them as they passed, though no one had stopped to address them directly. Perhaps none of them was managerial class, and so outsiders were off limits. Vigo was running his gaze over the hotel facade.
"You know, they might be able to pick up our voices even out here. We should be more careful."
Carina agreed, and they went inside. There was more to talk about, such as what might have happened to the rest of the Bathsheba's personnel. But it was all speculation. She could only hope that Bryce, her brothers and sisters, the Marchonish women, and the black dogs who had been taken captive were safe. She assumed they were having a similar experience to hers, though not the younger children. What would the Sotlosens make of them? After her siblings' many trials, she trusted them to keep their lips firmly shut about their abilities. They'd suffered far worse experiences than being kept in relative comfort too. But how would their captors treat prisoners who were too young to get to know better? The Sotlosens' behaviour was bizarre. She could only begin to guess at their motivation. Was it something to do with their belief system, which seemed out of the ordinary according to Hedron's hints? Were outsiders prized as romantic partners, and that was why they were reserved for higher classes? She arrived at the room assigned to her and Pamuk. She lay down on the bed to think, but she found herself thinking about Bryce. Was he receiving the same attention from the Sotlosans as everyone else? He had to be. Had he received offers he might find difficult to refuse? Almost certainly. She turned onto her front and rested her chin on the knuckles of her folded hands. It didn't take her long to dismiss the idea. Bryce had made his feelings about her plain. He had given up his entire family to follow her on a fool's quest. As long as he suspected she was still alive, he would refuse temptation. She was certainly not tempted. Even in ordinary circumstances, she would not have had feelings for Rano. He invaded her personal space, held eye contact too long, and for someone who had only just met her, he was simply overly keen. It was obvious he wasn't interested in her as a person, but what she had to offer. Which was? What did she have that a Sotlosan didn't? There was only one way to find out. She sat up and swung her legs off the bed. Scanning the walls, she discovered what she was looking for. The plain screen looked identical to the one at the former residence. That one was now melted and scorched somewhere in a pile of smouldering rubble. But this one might work in the same way. Except, she patted her pockets. Had Rano given her a card? She didn't think so. Despite the turbulent events surrounding their last two encounters, she doubted he lacked the presence of mind to give her his details. It was more likely he hadn't seen any need to let her know how to contact him. She walked up to the screen. "I want to speak to Rano's shelter." 1, 2, 3, 4. His face appeared.
"Carina, I'm so glad you got in contact. How can I help you?"
"I was wondering if you'd be interested in meeting up." Chapter 13. When Rhys returned to the cell, he seemed physically unharmed. Bryce had been concerned about the sample their captors had said they would take from him, but he didn't appear hurt.
"You okay?"
Bryce sat up as the door shut and the lock engaged. Rhys waved dismissively. "Yeah." He lay on his bunk, putting his cupped hands under the back of his head.
"What happened?"
Wasn't a big deal."
"Did they just want a blood sample?"
"Yeah, well, something like that." Something like a blood sample? What was like a blood sample? Bryce asked, confused.
"Did it hurt?"
He was a prisoner too. If the guards had taken Rhys for a medical procedure, the chances were the same thing would happen to him. Rhys gave him a look. "Let's not talk about it, all right?" Of all the black dogs Bryce had grown to know and, mostly, like in the many months since Carina had recruited the band, Rhys was the last one Bryce would have expected to be subdued and thoughtful. Yet that was exactly how he would have described the man's demeanour.
"Are you sure you're okay?"
Bryce snapped. "I said I don't want to talk about it." The intercom crackled to life.
"Prisoners, move away from the door."
As soon as the two men complied, the door opened and the same guard who had taken Rhys appeared. He nodded at Bryce.
"Your turn."
"It's best just to do what they say," Rhys said. "Good luck, kid." Bryce had been expecting to return to the upper levels and the medical centre where he'd been treated. It seemed the obvious place for the enemy to take a sample from him. But the guard led him deeper into the jail and down more stairs. How deep below the surface were they? Was the medical centre underground too? The location of their place of incarceration would make escaping the planet harder. No one had factored in that possibility. A set of double doors blocked off the end of the corridor. The guard spoke into the security panel and the door slid apart to reveal a clinically white, brightly lit room. 2 steel work surfaces ran the length of it on each side, and people wearing blue medics' uniforms stood at them, working with equipment Bryce didn't recognize. He was relieved to see no operating tables. "That way," said the guard, nodding at the end of the room, where a second set of doors stood. The medics ignored him as he walked past them. Anxiety tightened his gut again. Perhaps the operating tables were in the next room. Reese had seemed unharmed, but perhaps something different lay in store for him. Beyond the second set of doors was a smaller room containing only 3 people, a man and 2 women wearing white uniforms. One of the women stood at an open freezer, mist from it dissipating into the air. As he entered, she closed it, but he glimpsed rows of glass tubes. The man was working at an interface. "Last one," the guard said. "Great," said the other woman. "This is the one who was injured?" "Yeah." "So it's our first sample from him." She took a tube from a rack and held it out. "Spit in this." They only wanted his spit? He relaxed. Why hadn't Reese told him? Carina had always been wary of giving others access to her genetic information, but he didn't have anything to fear on that score. There was nothing special about his DNA. "I'll create a new file," said the man. Reese spat into the tube and handed it back. The woman placed it into an open slot in a machine. She picked up a second container, also made of glass, but wider and squatter, like a small cup. "We also need a semen sample. Go through there." She indicated a curtained alcove and pushed the container into his hands. He almost dropped it. You heard me, and don't take forever. It's been a long day, and we're all ready to go home." "Why?" he blurted. It was all he could think to say. "I'm not here to answer your questions. Do as I ordered. I won't tell you again." In one way, it was a simple request, yet he felt a huge reluctance to comply. Whatever the reason behind it, it had to be screwed up. Were they genetically engineering military personnel? Or perhaps they were making human mutants, experimenting to see what special abilities they could give their creations. He had heard of such attempts, though they were outlawed on most civilized planets. If either of his guesses was correct, he didn't see why they couldn't use their own genetic material. Why did it have to come from non-natives? Regardless, he didn't want any part of their experiments. No. He tried to return the container, but the woman stepped out of his reach, so he put it on the table. "I'm not doing it." "Don't be ridiculous. Get in there now and do as I say." "No way." "There's no need to be shy," said the other woman. "It's a natural act, and we're all accustomed to working with these samples." "I'm not shy. I'm just not doing it." He was feeling braver. What could they realistically do if he refused? Beating him up wouldn't help. A terrible thought occurred. "What about our women? Are you using their genetic material too?" He had visions of the female black dogs undergoing operations, or being impregnated against their will. He felt sick. "That's no concern of yours," said the man. "I don't agree. You're disgusting. Whatever it is you're doing, it's vile, and you should be ashamed." The guard cuffed him hard, causing him to stumble. "Watch out," the woman next to the freezer admonished. "We have sensitive equipment in here. If you're going to rough him up, do it in the corridor." The first woman said, "There's no point in roughing him up." She turned to Bryce. "I'm giving you one last chance." "I told you, I'm not doing it." Tutting, she stepped to her interface. The man moved aside and she swiped the screen, removing the data sets. "We have a non-compliant prisoner, male." We were just about to pack up," a voice replied. "I guessed so. We were nearly finished too." Can I send him up, or do you want to leave it until tomorrow?"
"Send him. We'll get it over with."
"Get what over with?" The woman nodded at the guard, who cursed and shoved him toward the door.
"You have to make life harder for everyone, don't you?"
He forced him into the outer room, through it, and back into the corridor. Bryce wasn't sure what was going on. He clearly wasn't going to his cell. The guard was taking him someplace else.
"What's happening? Am I going to be executed?"
"Ha!" The guard grabbed his upper arm and pushed him so fast they were nearly running.
"If it were up to me you would, but luckily for you, I don't make the decisions around here. Hurry up!"
They mounted the steps that led to the cells, but passed them by. The guard took him to the elevator, and they ascended to the upper levels. He was back in the medical treatment area once more. As they approached a room, he spied something through the open window that made his legs turn weak. It was what he'd been dreading, an operating table. He halted. The guard jerked him forward.
"What did you think was going to happen? They're gonna get their sample whether you like it or not." "No, It's too late to change your mind now," the guard barked. "You've wasted enough of everyone's time."
Bryce had stopped walking, but he was sliding toward the opening door, dragged by the guard. He swung his free hand around, forming a fist. The guard blocked the blow, grasped his arm, and kicked his legs out from under him. As his opponent bent down to grab him under his armpits, Bryce reared up, smashing his head into the guard's face. There was a grunt of pain, and Bryce felt the satisfying sensation of someone else's warm blood on his scalp. But then a blinding blow caught him on his ear, dazing him. Faintly he heard the doors open and a sarcastic voice say, "My, this one is non-compliant." Chapter 14.
"I have to say this is more pleasant and natural than the banquet."
Rano poured Carina a drink.
"And I feel safer with only you as my companion."
He winked. She felt insulted. Did he think she was less able to inflict damage on him than one of the black dogs? She didn't voice her anger, however. She was supposed to be trying to get along with him. Instead, she imagined transporting him up into the fake sky and letting him fall. Picking up her glass, she asked, "What's this?"
"Wine, of course. We can get on to the hard stuff later."
He winked again. Carina cringed with second-hand embarrassment. Made from grapes?
"I don't know that word. It's made from—"
"Forget it. I don't want to know." She took a sip. It was alcoholic. She had to give it that. She took another swallow, fortifying herself for the task ahead. She hadn't paid a lot of attention to Rano Shelter the first time she'd met him. Her goal had been to find out as much intel as she could, not get to know him as a person. But if she was to gain his trust, she would have to be more attentive and friendlier. She gritted her teeth. He'd brought her to a restaurant in Sarnak. It was an expensive place as far as she could tell. The servers were human, and they treated Rano with extreme deference. "This is nicer," she agreed. The dinner party felt forced, until the fighting started anyway.
"Yes, the fights have been quite something. We were expecting some difficulties, but not on that scale."
"You didn't expect us to object to what you've done?" She was incredulous.
"Treating people kindly usually makes them more amenable. Your group has been exceptionally combative."
"I wouldn't call—" she began hotly, but then she snapped her mouth shut while mentally continuing, "Dragging a starship off course and taking her crew prisoner, treating them kindly. If you find us unusual, that means you've done it before. There's a history of ships going missing in the area where your beam fastened onto us. How long have you been doing this?" He made a pained expression.
"Carina, I would love to tell you more, and I hope one day I will be free to do just that. But for now I simply can't. Let's talk about something else. I know hardly anything about you. Where are you from? What do you do?"
A server arrived with their dishes. Rano had ordered for her, due to the fact she'd recognised nothing on the menu. The server lifted a transparent tureen of green soup from their tray onto the table and added a dish of brown things swimming in a similarly coloured liquid and another dish of fried. Her stomach did a flip. "Are those maggots?"
"You mean these?"
He gestured at the crispy white grubs.
"We call them crudrans. They have a delicate flavour, quite sweet, though it depends on what they've been fed on. These are the best quality. You won't find better anywhere in Sotloza. Try some."
He scooped up a spoonful and, before she could protest, placed them on her plate. "They're dead. At least they're dead. Is there any point in me telling you where I'm from? Do you even know the names of the systems nearest yours? I come from a place very far away, a poor planet no one's heard of."
"I guess that's a fair comment. About my unfamiliarity with the nearest star systems, I mean. We're far distant from everywhere. I could find out the names of the nearest systems if I looked in the archives, but we Sotlozans rarely bother with such stuff. We're very self-contained.
Insular, more like. Why don't you tell me about yourself? You seem young to be security chief. Didn't anyone else want the job?" He chuckled.
"It is a hard job, but surprisingly, there's a lot of competition for it."
"So you have friends in high places?"
"Ha! I like your sense of humour. No, I didn't get a helping hand from an influential relative. I started young, worked hard, and I'm ambitious, that's all."
He eyed her plate.
"Not keen on the crudrans? How about some soup?"
The soup looked the least offensive dish. She ladled some into a bowl and peered at the contents. "This looks like algae. Am I right?"
"Well spotted."
She had some. It was okay. Algae was standard fare on many planets. Cheap and easy to grow, it could also take on a range of flavours. This was salty and aromatic. The warm liquid quelled her churning stomach somewhat, but it didn't make the maggots look any more appetizing. Questions ran through her mind. She had to find something made from wood. She wanted to find out why the Sotlozans had brought them here. The answer might help them escape. She was desperate to know what had happened to her family, Bryce, Ava, and everyone else from the Bathsheba. But what could she ask that this man would answer? She put down her spoon. Rano had been eating the maggots, mixing them in with the lumpy brown stuff. When he saw her watching him, he paused. "Rano, it's clear you want a deeper relationship with me."
"I don't think that's any secret."
"It's also clear you're not going to tell me why."
"I can't. I'm sorry."
"Do you even want to? But how can I develop feelings for you when there are so many secrets between us?"
"What can I say? I hope you can take it on good faith that my intentions are honourable."
"I can't," she said dully, shaking her head. "It's asking too much."
"Perhaps with time."
He appeared crestfallen, and she felt the absolutely tiniest smidgen of sympathy. The more time that passes, I'm only going to grow more resentful. I'm not as old as you, but I've been through a lot, and I know myself pretty well. Frankly, I hate Sotloza and its people. You've deprived me of my liberty and self-determination. You try to dress it up, but that's essentially what you've done. Neither me nor my companions are the types to just accept our fate and make the best of things." She took a breath. Was she laying it on too thick? She didn't want to convince him the situation was entirely hopeless. She wanted him to believe it was salvageable, with a little give on his part. He had slumped in his seat and a hint of defeat appeared in his eyes. But maybe, she went on, he perked up. Maybe if you could make a gesture of that good faith you were talking about, I might begin to see things differently.
Such as?
I haven't seen anyone else from my ship except the men and women I was with when I was captured. Are the rest of my companions alive?
Oh yes, they're all alive. No one was killed during the capture, mostly because you saw the wisdom of surrendering quickly, and no one has died since being brought to Sot Loza.
The speed and clarity of his answer told her he was in close contact with the people holding her companions captive. Thank you, that's a relief. With an undertone of guilt, he said,
I understand it must be hard for you to be separated from...
Please, she hissed, spare me your pity. Instantly, she regretted her visceral reaction, but it didn't seem to anger him. If anything, he looked abashed. She pushed her advantage. Can I see them? She knew what his answer would be, but her question had a wider purpose.
That isn't possible.
After refusing the big ask of her first request, he should find it harder to refuse a second, smaller one. Then can I at least know where they are? We had some children with us. I'm especially worried about them. She made sure to add a tremble to her voice. Lifting her napkin, she dabbed the corner of her eye and looked down. In truth, she was only partly faking her feelings. After an awkward silence, Rano murmured,
I suppose it won't hurt to tell you the location of the children.
Chapter 15. Sot Loza was divided into 3 zones, all dug out below the uninhabitable surface over centuries. According to historical records, the early years of colonization had been extremely tough. The colony teetered on the edge of oblivion several times, with hundreds of colonists dying of starvation or succumbing to the elements while waiting for the underground settlements to be built. But it had clung on despite all the adversities thrown at it. Like most colonization attempts, the plan had been to create an agricultural economy first, ensuring food security before moving on to technological development after the colony had established itself. But the proposed methods of farming were all surface-based, relying on sunlight, rain, soil, clement weather, and moderate temperatures. Nothing had prepared the colonists for growing food underground. They'd been forced to use every ounce of ingenuity and invention to meet the challenge. While Rano had been relating all this to Carina, he'd been drinking steadily. Was he working up his courage to divulge something he knew he shouldn't? She waited patiently as he wended his way toward telling her the location of her siblings. The more he drank, the more loquacious he'd become, lacing his words with many tangentially related facts and asides. She had let him talk. She'd barely eaten anything, but had called for more wine and regularly topped up her dinner partner's glass. The restaurant slowly emptied of diners until it was just the 2 of them, alone at their table while the wait staff hovered in the shadows.
So you see, these dishes you don't seem to like very much. They're all the results of years of hard work and mental effort. A lot of them must be unique to our planet. They're a symbol of our survival.
Sorry if I offended you. I didn't realize how important your food is to you.
Yes, well...
He blinked and looked around the room as if noticing everyone else had left. You are going to tell me what happened to the children from my ship.
Why don't we continue this conversation at my place, where I have some rather special liquor? It isn't far from here.
She assessed his state. He seemed too inebriated to be a physical threat, and more alcohol might loosen his lips even further. She agreed. Rano Shelter's dwelling was within walking distance of the restaurant. They passed through mostly empty streets. Twilight hung over the town, just enough light to see by while giving the impression of night. He didn't attempt to hold her hand or put his arm around her as they walked along, for which she was grateful. She didn't want to sour the atmosphere by rebuffing him. After all the winking going on when she'd first arrived at the restaurant, she'd been apprehensive he would overstep. But if anything, tipsiness seemed to have made him less confident and more subdued. They arrived at a house that fronted directly onto the street, detached from the others. Like all the buildings, it was 2 stories tall. Single windows bordered the door on each side, and 3 windows sat in a row on the 2nd floor. The place was small for a chief of security, but then perhaps it was old, built in a time when underground space was more scarce. Rano pressed the security panel and the door opened. He led her to a living room on the right, telling her to take a seat while he got their drinks. The living room window was opaque and played a vid of a waterfall in a lush forest, accompanied by the gentle sounds of falling water and birdsong. Taken aback at experiencing something so unsot Lozan, Carina stared. Rano broke her trance by handing her a drink.
"It's beautiful, isn't it? Nice to come home to after a long day at work. I never tire of it."
"Is it a recording of your origin planet?"
"It's supposed to be, though I don't know for sure. It could be entirely artificial, a sim. I like to tell myself it isn't."
She ruminated on the trees bordering the water. "Doesn't it make you wish you could live somewhere like that? Or at least visit?"
"That would be like wishing I could time travel into the past."
She sniffed the drink and took a cautious sip. It was strongly alcoholic, with a flavour she couldn't identify. "Don't tell me what this is made from." He smiled.
"Okay."
She sat down. He joined her, but didn't sit too closely as she'd expected him to. It was odd. The drunker he got, the less annoying he became. It was the opposite of what she'd expected based on life experience. He sipped his drink, an arm over the back of the seat, his chin slumping toward his chest. Was he about to nod off? "You were telling me Sot Loza has 3 zones. I take it the children from my ship aren't in this one."
"Huh?"
His head snapped up.
"Oh yeah, 3 zones. There was a civil war 400 years back. It was a political thing. Up until then, Sot Loza had been governed by a single ruler. A hangover from the early days of colonization. A series of strong-minded figures had carried the population through the hard times. Some people thought it was time to elect the governing body. Before that, the leader had chosen the members and retained right of veto on their decisions. Democratic elections had been the political system of our home planet, and this new faction said we should return to it. Others disagreed, saying the Sot Lozan system had worked for us so far, and there was no reason it couldn't continue to work."
Carina clenched her jaw, aching to snap at him, telling him she didn't give a shit about his planet's history. But she had to be patient. He would either tell her where her family was, or he wouldn't, and pressuring him wouldn't work. Besides, if he passed out while he was droning on about his world, she would be free to search his house undisturbed. The sight of the trees in the vid had made her wonder if he owned wooden artifacts from his origin planet. Perhaps such things were prized.
"We said we would go along with whichever system the winners chose. The war was short and bloody. The zone that fought for elections won. Sot Loza's leader was executed."
He sighed.
"It was harsh, but if they hadn't killed her, she would have tried to rally support and start another war."
"Uh-huh," Carina remarked in a monotone.
"It's interesting."
"Is it?"
Prior to the war, the 3 zones were separated by kilometers of rock. They'd been settled at different stages of the colonization. This one's the oldest. Twice in the past a group had split off, deciding they wanted to open a mining site to create a new zone, though under the overall authority of the leader. Over the centuries, new dialects developed, and then entirely different languages. Here we don't speak universal anymore.
I had noticed.
But one of the other zones still does, as a second language. That's the youngest zone.
Is that where the children from my ship are?
Yes,
he replied, as naturally as if he were telling her something insignificant.
That's where they were taken. The zones were joined up by tunnels 40 years ago, and linguists expect the languages to merge again eventually.
She closed her eyes and rested her head on the seat back. Her siblings were far away, but at least she had an idea of where they were. How were they getting on? She was in a constant state of anticipation, hoping to receive a send from one of them, probably Darius, whose sends were powerful enough to cross the planet.
You're tired. I should take you back to your hotel.
I'm not tired, just thinking.
What about?
Life's hard here. He appeared about to protest, so she held up a hand to stop him. Hear me out. I understand that you're proud of what you've achieved, and you should be. In the history of galactic colonization, I don't think a colony has ever been established under such terrible conditions. But things are different now. You have starships that could take you away from all this, to underpopulated planets where life is much easier. Maybe you don't have the capacity to transport everyone all at once, but over time you could do it. All of you could walk in sunlight and wind, swim in oceans and rivers, stand under waterfalls like the one playing on your window screen, instead of burrowing underground like rats and eating maggots. You must know it's possible, yet you choose to stay here. I don't get it. He reached out a hand to cover hers.
Don't worry. In time, you'll understand.
Chapter 16. Though Rano had been pretty drunk by the time Carina left, she hadn't managed to squeeze any more intel out of him. It was only to be expected, she'd reflected as she walked back to the hotel. He was the zone's security chief, after all. You didn't get into positions like that by being an idiot. He must have only divulged the location of her siblings because he thought she wouldn't or couldn't act on the information. Pamuk was out of it and snoring when she entered their room. She went to bed feeling a little more hopeful about the situation. The kids were alive at least. She was confident Rano hadn't lied to her. On the other hand, she knew for certain that they and the rest of the black dogs were far away. Most likely the Bathsheba's personnel had been split into 3 groups, each group allocated to one of Sotloza's zones. Keeping them apart made sense. There was strength in numbers, and if any one group managed to escape, they would face the difficult choice of abandoning their companions or risking recapture by trying to get the others out too. For her, there was no dilemma. She would free her brothers and sisters, Bryce, the Marchonish women, and the black dogs, or die trying. The mercs were less important to her than her family, but she felt responsible for their predicament. If it weren't for her, they would still be working in their old sector, not on this harebrained escapade. As nebulous ideas on how to resume their journey swirled around her mind, she fell asleep. Someone was shaking her. "Wake up! Chertang's found some wood! Wake up!" Ugh. She turned onto her back and squinted, her eyes gritty. Pale lilac light glowed through the window. Someone had pressed the dawn button. Pamuk stood over her. "Chertang reckons he knows where we can get some wood." "Okay." Her tongue seemed to have swollen to twice its usual size, and it moved in her mouth like a slug that had lost its slime. The meaning of Pamuk's words began to filter through. Wood? Yeah, wood, the merc snapped. You remember that stuff? Hey! She rose onto her elbows and hissed, What are you thinking? Pamuk appeared to suddenly remember where she was. I just thought it was interesting. Carina rolled her eyes. I'm gonna get up, then we'll go for a walk, okay? Yeah, sure. 10 minutes later, she was out on the street with Chertang, Pamuk and Vigo. Chertang was buoyant, full of energy as he almost skipped along. Carina's steps were leaden. She had only had 3 hours sleep. They walked toward the town centre, where the elevator to the surface was located. Few people were about at this early hour. When no one was within hearing distance, she said, So what exactly did you find, Chertang, and where is it? He hung his head. I'm kinda regretting saying anything now. Why? Carina asked, deflating. Aren't you sure this thing is made from genuine wood? Yeah, that's one problem. I spent most of my life on Lakshmi. There's not a lot of natural products there. I'm not sure if I'm right. I'm no expert. That's okay, said Vigo. If you're wrong, you're wrong. You tried, right? Yeah, but... Chertang continued to hesitate. What's the other problem? Carina asked irritably. Her head was pounding. Spit it out! You guys are gonna try and get this thing, aren't you? Well, duh, said Pamuk. Chertang went on. I was thinking you might get hurt for something that I'm not even sure is what I think it is. And anyway, is it even worth it? I kinda like it here. Maybe sticking around wouldn't be so bad, especially when trying to leave could be a big disaster. Carina said, I didn't know there were small disasters. You're forgetting several facts, and no, I'm not going to spell them out to you. Think about it. The point is, we want that wood, and we're going to try to get it. So where is it? He huffed a sigh. That's the third problem. Carina suppressed an urge to punch him. I made a friend, a Sot Lozan, and I like her. I'm beginning to think I like her a lot. I don't want anything bad to happen to her while you guys do your stuff. How long have you known this person? Vigo asked. I only met her yesterday, but we really connected. Deep down, you know. Vigo met Carina's gaze. I can cautiously say your relationship may not be as meaningful as you imagine it to be. You don't know her. She's wonderful. Really nice. Carina muttered, Give me strength. Vigo placed a friendly hand on Chertang's shoulder. Have you considered this woman may have an ulterior motive for being nice to you? I knew you would say that. You've been saying the Sot Lozans have brought us here for a purpose, that there's something weird going on. But can any of you tell me what that purpose is? Do you know why we're here? Just because we don't know the answer, said Carina, that doesn't mean there isn't one, or that it isn't bad. Is this person your first girlfriend? Chertang looked down. I never had time for relationships before. The boss I was working for kept me too busy, and to be honest, no one seemed interested anyway. My man, said Vigo, extending his reach over Chertang's shoulders and grabbing him into a sideways hug. You have plenty of time to get a girlfriend. Take it from me, you don't want to get too involved too early on in the game. Play the field. Carina rolled her eyes, scarcely believing that getting off the planet would involve giving relationship advice to their accidental pickup from Lakshmi Station. We don't have time for this bullshit. We're prisoners. The Sot Lozans took our ship. They're holding people I love captive, and I might never see them again if you don't get your head out of your ass and tell us where the hell you—"
"Keep your voice down,"
Vigo urged. "Yeah, cool it, Carina," said Pamuk. "Everyone's on edge, not just you." She leaned closer to Chertang and said in a hushed tone, "You've seen the black dogs in action. If you don't want to get their attention, cough up where this thing is you claimed you saw." He paled.
"I wish I hadn't said anything now."
"Well, you did, so you better follow through."
All right.
He raised his hands in exasperation. "Last night I went out with the hotel manager. She took me back to her place and, you know—" "We know," said Carina. And she had a beautiful house. Her family own a string of hotels all over Sotloza. There was this display case in one of the rooms upstairs, and something in it caught my eye. It was a bowl, very simple and plain, not like the rest of the ornaments, which were all shiny and fancy. So I asked her what it was, wondering why it was in there with all the expensive stuff. She said I had great taste, that I'd noticed the most valuable item. She said it was one of the few surviving objects from the colonization era, and it must have been brought on a colony ship from their origin planet because it was made from a plant that died a long time ago. It has to be wood, right?" "What color was it?" Carina asked. "Dark brown, almost black."
"Could be what we're looking for," said Vigo. "Did you handle it?"
"I didn't dare ask. The case was locked." "What was the security like at the house?" asked Carina. "Tight. A fence, guards, house security system, the works." "Figures. Do you think you can disarm the security?" "I can try, but I'm not promising anything." Leaving Sotloza was not going to be easy. Chapter 17. When Bryce came to, he was back in his cell. The dimly lit drab ceiling that swam into focus, the sensation of lying on a hard, lumpy mattress, and the noise of Reese's snoring told him so. He ached everywhere. The guard had roughed him over before handing him to the medics. After that, he vaguely remembered a mask descending over his face and then blackness. An ache in a particular part of his body told him the operation he'd undergone had been what he'd suspected. What the Sotlozans couldn't get him to give up freely, they'd taken by force. He adjusted his position, sparking fresh pain, and a groan escaped. The sound of snoring ceased. "You're back in the land of the living?" Reese asked. "Looks like it," Bryce muttered through swollen, bruised lips. "They did you over pretty good. I can tell. Was it because you wouldn't give 'em a sample?" "Uh-huh." "Shouldn't get hung up about it. It's no big deal." "Right, I'll bear that in mind. How often have you had to do it?" "Every couple of days. If that's the worst we can expect, we should count ourselves lucky." "I'm not doing it." There was a rustling sound as Reese moved on his bunk. "Look at me, kid." With some difficulty, Bryce turned onto his side to face the older man. "Don't get a stick up your ass about nothing. They could be doing a whole lot worse things to us. All we need to do is to sit tight, do as they say, and try not to." "Have you thought about what they're using our samples for?" Bryce asked. "Not for a second. Why would I care?" "You don't care if they're using your genetic material for human experimentation?" "I don't give a shit what they're using it for. Whatever it is, that's on them, not me. It's their responsibility. And if they didn't get it from me, they would get it somewhere else. That stuff's not exactly hard to come by." "All right," Bryce seethed.
If it doesn't faze you that you might be fathering babies born to live in pain, or actual monsters, have you considered what they must be doing to Carina and maybe Parthenia too, and the Marchonish women, the female black dogs? What do you mean? What they're asking from us is easy to deliver. It's different for women.
He didn't want to go into any more detail because the idea made him feel sick.
Okay, point taken. But what difference would it make if I refuse? They'll just take it, the same as they did to you. It'll show them what they're doing isn't okay.
Yeah, Rhys scoffed.
Like they care what we think. Even if it makes no difference, you'll keep your integrity. Ha! That's a damn fancy word. Talk to me again when you can grow a beard, kid. I might be younger than you, but that doesn't mean I haven't lived, or that I haven't learned right from wrong. That's something you seem to have forgotten. Kill enough men and you'll soon learn there isn't any right or wrong. There's only living another day or getting smoked.
Bryce was silent. He didn't know how to reach this hardened merc and make him understand. He also wasn't sure he should or could, or that it was worth it. Men like Rhys had endured adversities he couldn't even imagine, and seen inconceivable horrors. Who was he to lecture him on morality? Another idea occurred.
We've been here days. Don't you think something should have happened by now?
Yeah,
the thought had crossed my mind. Something must have gone wrong. And if it has, that means we aren't getting out of here any time soon. If we don't want to spend the rest of our lives as lab rats, we can't just sit here twiddling our thumbs. Maybe, but what can we do? It's just the two of us. Have you seen any other black dogs? No, I can't even figure out if they're in nearby cells.
Me neither. The guards are being careful to keep us all separated. The light flicked from dim to full.
Prisoners, move away from the door.
Bryce and Rhys locked eyes. Had their conversation been overheard? Were they about to be punished? Blinking in the brighter light, Bryce got slowly and painfully to his feet and joined Rhys, who stood with his back to the far wall. When the door slid open, the guard jabbed a finger at him.
You're to come with me.
As well as being armed, this one carried a thick baton. His partner waited behind him.
Already? I only just got back. Move!
They must have loved your sample, Rhys joked.
Yeah, top quality stuff.
Bryce shuffled across the cell. As he left, he caught a glimpse of Rhys's look of concern. Then he was alone with the guards.
Where are you taking me?
They didn't answer. They passed locked cells, enigmatically silent.
Hey,
he yelled.
Any black dogs here?
The baton hit him in his midriff. An oof exploded from his mouth and he doubled over.
Try that again, and next time it'll be your kidneys. Now move.
Bryce staggered forward. No reply had come from the cells, but they could be soundproofed. He'd never detected any noise from outside his own. They were moving toward the elevator again. Was he about to undergo another operation? What would the medics take from him this time? Or was he about to take part in their experiments in another way? He fought the urge to vomit, not only triggered by the blow to his stomach. When they reached the elevator, the guards took him right past it, so he wasn't returning to the medical center after all. The passageway turned a corner and widened out. Here the walls were more brightly coloured and cleaner, and more lights shone overhead. The atmosphere seemed better too. The air smelled sweeter and less dank. They stepped into a new section, where a dark tunnel replaced one wall. It was a transport line. The platform was empty. They waited only a few minutes before a single carriage swept in and drew to a stop. The passengers who alighted were all in medic uniforms. They cast glances at Bryce, but ducked their heads, avoiding eye contact.
Where are you taking me?
He asked again as the guards pushed him into the car. A surreal feeling settled over him. It was like he was going on vacation with two stern, strict uncles who weren't about to take any shit from their nephew. A few passengers remained in the carriage, and they turned their heads as if to pretend he didn't exist. He and the guards didn't sit. At the next stop, they forced him off. Ignoring his aches and pains as well as he could, he took careful note of his surroundings. It was interesting, and perhaps useful, to know that there was a transportation system so close to the prison. The map he'd seen on the train had shown it was a closed loop of 10 or 12 stations. Their names hadn't meant anything. They hadn't indicated what was at each stop, such as an elevator to the surface or a spaceport. The guards walked him down a narrow circular tunnel. At the end, they climbed a long flight of steps. Near the top, Bryce halted in amazement. He could see the sky. It was pale lilac, and clouds scudded across it. A guard grabbed his elbow.
Get up there. We haven't got all day.
They stepped out onto a street. It looked ordinary, like you might see on any planet, though not many people were about. A longer look at the sky told Bryce it was early morning or dusk. He couldn't see a sun. A vehicle was waiting. They boarded it, and 10 minutes later it drew up outside a single-story building set back from the street. Bryce was completely confused. No scenario he could imagine explained what was happening. Was he being transferred to this new place due to the conversation he'd had with Reese? If so, why hadn't the guards simply put him into another cell? The double-doored entrance opened at their approach. Beyond it stood 5 familiar figures. Parthenia ran forward to hug him, but drew up short.
"Oh, Bryce, what have they done to you?"
Chapter 18. The feeling he was in a dream hadn't abated. Bryce sat in the living room drinking tea with Carina's siblings, as if it was just another rest day aboard the Bathsheba. Meanwhile, 2 armed guards stood at the door, one looking inward, the other out into the rest of the house, and they were trapped on an alien planet with currently no prospect of leaving. Ava was here too, somewhere. She had come, babe in arms, to briefly say hello before disappearing, presumably to give him time alone with the kids. He was having trouble keeping it together. Parthenia was the problem. She couldn't help it, but she looked so like her older sister, his mind was crowded with Carina. What was happening to her? Had their captors, the Sot Lozans the children had told him, been experimenting on her? When he'd seen the kids, his hopes had briefly lifted that Carina was here too, but she was not. None of her brothers or sisters had seen or heard of her since leaving the ship.
"I wish I could make you better,"
Oriana whispered, lines of concern creasing her forehead as she peered at him. She meant she would have cast heal if she could, which meant she could not. The kids didn't have elixir and hadn't managed to make any. He didn't know which ingredient they were lacking, and they couldn't tell him. Not with a guard listening to every word they spoke.
"I look worse than I feel," he replied. "Don't worry about me."
"What about everyone else?" Parthenia asked. "Have you seen them? Are they all right?" Again there was a subtext. She wanted to know about Carina, but couldn't reveal their relationship.
"I'm cellmates with Reese. He's fine, or as well as you might expect considering we're being held prisoner. I don't know anything about anyone else. Sorry."
"Oh." Parthenia's shoulders slumped. She'd undoubtedly been hoping for a hint that her resourceful sister was in the process of arranging everyone's escape, or at the very least that she was okay. He wished he could have reassured her, if not about their imminent release from captivity, then Carina's well-being, if only. There was one subject they could discuss without fear, however.
What I don't understand is, why am I here? Do any of you know?
That's easy, Fern replied. We begged them to let us see you. We told them you're our friend, and if they wouldn't show us you're alive and well, we would stop eating. It was yesterday we made the threat, though we've been asking to see you ever since we were taken from the ship.
I see. So that explains why Darius is stuffing his mouth with cake.
The little boy gave him a crumb-speckled grin.
Are you all okay? Have you been treated well?
Parthenia replied. Apart from keeping us prisoner, everyone has been very kind. We don't like the food very much, but they've given us plenty and a wide range of it too. We're allowed out under supervision, so we've been exploring as much as we can. This was bad news. If the kids had free rein to find what they needed for elixir, and they'd been unsuccessful, it meant one or more of the items was scarce or entirely absent.
What have you discovered about this place?
Parthenia told him the Sotlozans lived entirely underground and had done so ever since they discovered the planet centuries ago. The colonists had intended to go somewhere else, but an accident on their ship had driven them many light years off course. It isn't horrible here, Oriana added, but it isn't very nice either. I don't want to spend the rest of my life on this planet. They keep telling us we'll get used to it eventually. We won't, Nala said vehemently. I won't. I hate it. It's so boring, and it's outrageous that they stole our ship. Bryce couldn't help smiling at the little girl's anger, though not in a patronising way, but because she was so forthright in front of the guards. Nala was fearless, despite having no mage powers.
Try not to give up hope, he said. Maybe the Sotlozans will see sense soon and let us go. How are they treating Ava?
Like a queen, said Fern. They seem to like her best of all of us. No one knows why. Even she can't figure it out. It's because she has a baby, Darius commented. Huh? Fern's lip curled in sceptical puzzlement. That's a stupid reason. What makes you say that? They get all warm and fuzzy inside when they see it. Parthenia frowned at him, warning him to not mention anything else pertaining to his mage abilities. He looked down, abashed. Come to think of it, she said, you could be right. I am right. She turned to Bryce. They're very patient and gentle around Ava. It would make sense their being especially careful because the baby is so young and vulnerable. He tried to reconcile this side of the Sotlozans with the treatment he had personally received from them. He couldn't. They're more patient than me, said Oriana. The little thing never seems to stop crying. I'm never having children. They would send me crazy. Good, said Fern, because if you did, I would be the worst uncle in the galaxy. Now I've experienced living with one, I agree with you. All they ever do is cry, eat, and poop. Parthenia reached out and touched Bryce's hand. I'm going to speak to the guards and ask them if you can come here and live with us. You're part of our family. We should be together. A rush of emotion hit him. Again, her resemblance to Carina, coupled with his fears, were overwhelming. Chapter 19. Carina rubbed her sweaty palms on her pants. She didn't think she'd ever been so nervous on a raid, not even when she'd gone with Captain Speedle to rescue Darius from his Dirksen kidnappers. Was it because she didn't have any elixir? Even if she'd never intended to use it, she'd always taken some with her when she'd been a black dog. Just having a flask on her hip gave her a sense of security. If she was in a bad spot, she could transport out, or if she was wounded, she could heal herself. Elixir was a great backup plan. Now she was as vulnerable as a non-mage, and she didn't like it. she felt naked. Being unarmed didn't help either, but strangely enough that didn't bother her as much. As well as the lot of Krillin, Vigo, her merc companions were Pamuk, Mads and Burkan, seasoned warriors, well-trained and veterans of many battles. Military conflict had weeded out the worst fighters in the Black Dogs, though they had lost some of the best too through sheer bad luck. She recalled Cadwallader, Atoy and Halliday, all good people, good friends, all gone. She swallowed and blinked as she peered out from her hiding place, hoping they would not lose anyone tonight. It wasn't likely. The Sot Lozans seemed intent on handling their prisoners with kid gloves, but it wasn't impossible. The residence Chertang had brought them to was out of town. A wide 2-story house stood behind tall railings and a large gate. Lights from the windows shone brightly in the darkness, illuminating the open ground in front of the house and the guards standing on each side of the gate. Were more guards patrolling the site? None had been spotted yet. "How much longer before they go to bed?" Pamuk whispered. "It's already late." "How would I know?" Carina replied. "We'll have to wait as long as it takes. Be patient." They were in the construction site opposite Chertang's girlfriend's house. Someone seemed to have been building a mansion to rival her family's, in the usual habit of the rich trying to outdo each other. Their cover was the portable office of the site. The place was empty now all the workers had gone home. Vigo said,
"Have you noticed how quiet it is here at night? At home, even out in the desert, there would be noises. The wind in the dunes, the calls of nocturnal animals, the scrape of creatures moving through the sand. Here, there's nothing."
"That isn't right," said Pamuk. "You can hear something. Listen hard." Mads and Burkan were still, and the little group listened. One of the guards outside the house they were staking out shifted position, and Carina heard the faint rustle of his uniform. Then there was nothing, except it was not quite nothing.
"I can hear it," said Vigo. "What is that?"
"Fans," Carina replied, the moment recognition hit her. "I remember feeling a faint breeze when we stepped out of the elevator. The Sot Lozans must run fans to keep the atmosphere breathable." "You can barely hear the hum," said Pamuk. "Only at night when there's no traffic around. It took me a while to figure out what it was. I bet the locals aren't even aware of it." "Yeah," Carina agreed. "Probably not. They grew up with it." The downstairs lights in the residence went out. Only 2 upstairs lights remained on.
"Ha,"
said Vigo.
"Not long now."
Carina wasn't so sure. Chertang had gone into the house with his date a couple of hours ago. She guessed it would still be another hour or so before he could sneak down and open the front door. It was the only signal he could give them, and not being a fighter, the only help he could offer. The man lacked the skills and guile to steal the bowl from its display case, so they were forced to do it themselves. She chewed her lip. Was 5 too many for the raid, or were they too few? But they couldn't have brought any more mercs along. The Sot Lozans seemed to know where every outsider was at all times. The 5 of them simply slipping out of the hotel and walking out here under cover of darkness had been risky. First one, and then the other upstairs light went out.
"This is it,"
said Vigo, his tone tense. "No, it isn't," said Carina. "Take it easy." "Yeah," said Pamuk. "Relax." She leaned her back on the wall of the flimsy office. "Shit, I can't wait to get out of this place and back to the ship. Sot Loza is more boring than deep sleep." "But you aren't aware of anything in deep sleep," Carina replied, puzzled. "Exactly. So they don't compare. That's what I mean." Pamuk's answer wasn't enlightening, but Carina left it. There was no understanding Mercs sometimes. She wondered how Jackson and Van Hasty were doing, and Shao. Of all the black dogs, she got on with the pilot the best, probably because Shao usually thought things through before she acted.
"Come on,"
Vigo muttered.
"How long's Chertang gonna take?"
"Longer than a minute, I hope," said Pamuk, "or his new girlfriend's gonna be disappointed." Her fellow Mercs sniggered. Carina peered up and down the road, though she couldn't see far. Night enveloped the grey strip now the house lights had gone out. Only the faux stars and the glow of street lights in Laft lit the darkness. "Can anyone actually see the front doors?" Pamuk asked. In truth, it was practically impossible. Carina wasn't sure she could differentiate between any aspects of the shadowy facade. An open door would only look like a slightly darker patch. Pamuk cursed. "We didn't think of this, and we can't comm him to give us a clearer signal."
"We could try to get closer to the gate,"
said Vigo.
"We might see the doors better then."
"And we might not," Pamuk replied, "while the guards will certainly see us." Damn it! Carina tried to think of a way around the problem, but she couldn't. How could they tell if the doors opened in near pitch blackness? "We'll just have to do our best. We need that bowl. It might be the only piece of wood in all Sotloza."
"We could forget about it and come back another night. We'll see Chertang tomorrow. We can agree on a different signal, one that will actually work in these conditions."
"I don't know," said Carina. "I'd rather take our chances now. There's no guarantee the bowl will even be there after tonight, or that we'll be able to come out here again without being noticed. The Sotlozans are probably looking for us already, wondering where we've gone. After tonight, they'll watch us more closely." "Lin's right," said Pamuk. "We won't get this chance again. We've been treated pretty nicely, but we're still prisoners. We can't forget that."
"Then maybe we can think of another—"
"Shh!" hissed Pamuk. "Did you hear that?" Carina strained her ears, but the only sound she could detect was the faint hum of the ventilation fans. "What do you think you heard?" "A door opening." She squinted at the front of the house. Was the sight of the doors darker than the rest of it? "It's too soon. He can't have snuck downstairs yet. I swear that's what I heard. We need to move, now, before someone notices the open door and closes it." "Okay, let's do it." The group ran out from their cover and about 30 meters down the street, moving softly and quietly. When they reached the spot opposite the corner of the fence, they darted across the road. If the estate guards saw them, they didn't raise an alarm. Pamuk in the lead, they jogged along the fence line, not stopping until they were out of sight of the guards. Mads made a stirrup from his hands. Pamuk put a foot in it and he boosted her up. She grabbed the top of the railings and pulled herself over. There was a soft thunk as her dark figure landed on the other side. It was Carina's turn next. A moment later, she hit the ground next to Pamuk. In another few seconds, Vigo joined them. Mads and Burkan would wait to help them climb back over the fence, assuming they didn't get caught. 3 cars were parked on this side of the house. They ran behind them to the wall and then up to the corner. Peeking out, Carina saw the guards. They faced outward toward the road. It was only then it struck her how odd their presence was. The owners of the house were rich, there was no doubt about that, but armed guards seemed overkill. Sotlozan society didn't seem particularly lawless or violent. She had no more time to think about it. Pamuk was on her way to the front door. Vigo quickly followed her and Carina brought up the rear. The Merc had been right. The front door was wide open. They walked unimpeded into the hallway. "Chertang," Pamuk whispered, almost inaudibly. No answer came. Chapter 20. Minutes had passed and there was no sign of their companion. They were alone in the large dark hallway. The house was silent. A pale glow spilled down from the second floor. Open doorways led to the downstairs rooms, all seemingly empty. The household had gone to bed, and so had Chertang, apparently. The plan had been that he would disarm the security, open the door, and wait for them inside before taking them to the bowl. Was he hoping that if he wasn't present for the robbery he wouldn't be suspected of helping, and he could continue his romantic relationship with the rich daughter? "Where the fuck is that idiot?" Pamuk hissed. "I should have known he would half-ass it."
"What do we do now?"
murmured Vigo. "Anyone remember which room the display case is in?" Carina asked. "Did he say it was upstairs?" Pamuk replied, "Yeah, but I'm pretty sure he didn't mention where."
"We can't search everywhere. The house is full of sleeping people. We're bound to wake someone up."
"We would wake them up when we smash that case open anyway."
"Yeah,"
Vigo replied with forced patience.
"But then we would leave fast. If we wake everyone up before we find the bowl."
"Okay, I get it. We have to try," said Carina. "Come on." She tiptoed up the wide central staircase. The deep carpet helped to mask the sound of their footsteps. At the top, the reason for Chertang's omission in not describing the location of the display room became clear. 4 corridors led from the staircase, lit at intervals by tiny wall lights, not much brighter than candles. At the end of each corridor, another crossed it. The upstairs space was like a warren. They picked one corridor at random. A closed door confronted them. They halted. Could this be the right place? Carina asked the others with her eyes. Vigo shrugged. It might make sense for the display room to be close to the central area. She pressed an ear against the door. From inside the room came the distinct sound of someone snoring. She shook her head and they moved on. The next door stood ajar. Carina stuck her head in the opening. Screens bedecked the walls, and a hollow projector stood in the centre. It seemed to be a room for entertainment or education. At the next room no sound could be heard, but the door wouldn't open, and so on they went. They'd reached the end of the corridor. Pamuk took the left turn, and Carina and Vigo followed. The farther they got into the Sotlosen mansion, the faster Carina's heart raced. They were moving away from their escape route and increasing the distance they would have to run when they smashed open the case to get the wooden bowl. She guessed they were already so far from the front door that the guards would easily reach it before them. And then what? She didn't think their punishment would be unbearably severe, but the object of their crime, the bowl, would be taken from them. And they would face very awkward questions about why they wanted it. Pamuk had stopped at a door and was listening. She grinned at them and made an obscene gesture to indicate the activity she could hear going on within. Vigo leaned in to listen too. Carina rolled her eyes and stepped past them. A short way along the corridor they caught up to her. "I think that was Chertang," Pamuk whispered in her ear. "You're disgusting," Carina muttered. 3 more doors yielded no results. When she listened at the 4th, she heard an odd sound she couldn't identify. It was a quiet, rhythmic hiss, a mechanical noise, not human. She beckoned Vigo closer to get his opinion. He listened and then gave her a baffled look. Whatever was going on in the room, she doubted it had anything to do with displaying ancient artifacts, so she walked past it. Pamuk was already at the next door, which stood open. She entered the room and immediately emerged from it again, wildly gesticulating. She had found it. They went inside and closed the door. Tall glass cabinets occupied much of the space. It was easy to see why the owners had picked this room to display their most precious items. The floor-to-ceiling windows would allow in plenty of light during the daytime. Even at night, the starlight glinted beautifully on the cabinets and gilded their contents. There were tiaras, necklaces, brooches, rings and hairpins. Some lined open boxes held only single gems. Another cabinet displayed ceramic art, highly decorated. The next she looked into contained portraits carved onto flat pebbles. The colony's founders? She felt a tap on her shoulder. Vigo tugged her arm, bringing her to a corner display. On the third transparent shelf sat a small plain bowl. Perhaps it was dark brown, as Chertang had said, but in the dim light it looked black, and it was so small it must have been for a baby. She nodded. This had to be it. She tried the cabinet door, but it wouldn't open. Pamuk waved them back and took a fist-sized rock from her pocket. They were far from the only exit, too far. But if they didn't want to spend the rest of their lives on this backward planet, they had no other options. Pamuk slammed the rock into the glass. It bounced back. The glass was not glass, but a transparent material, fortified against breaking. Shit! Pamuk grimaced and rubbed her shoulder. Be quiet, Carina urged softly. Pointlessly, she tried the lock again. The wooden bowl tantalized her, sitting innocently on the shelf, the answer to so many of their problems. They'd come all the way here, searched for it and found it, but it remained beyond their grasp. Let me try again, Pamuk whispered.
That's never going to work,
said Vigo.
But I saw something that might. Help me lay this thing down.
He reached for the top of the cabinet while Pamuk took the bottom. The items inside shifted, sliding from their shelves as the angle altered. Vigo and Pamuk moved slowly, but some noise was inevitable. Carina winced and looked furtively at the door. They were bound to wake someone up. A sense of hopelessness hit. Vigo was scanning the other cabinets. He strode to one that looked emptier than the others, squatted down and wrapped his arms around it. I get the idea, Pamuk said quietly. We'd better get out of his way. Carina got the idea too. The cabinet's legs tapered to a narrow point. Vigo heaved the display case up and carried it over to the prone one. Carina put her hands to her face as she watched in trepidation. He smashed it down, driving the point of one leg into the transparent surface. It cracked, but he'd made a racket. The objects in the cabinet he was holding clattered against the sides. The crack had been loud. Do it again, Pamuk prompted. The second blow split the crack into shards, which collapsed into the cabinet. Get it! Carina reached inside. She'd kept her eye on the bowl the entire time. She flicked aside the splinters and grabbed it before shoving it into her shirt. Let's go! They sped through the room. Vigo tore the door open and they piled through the doorway. Carina ran only a few steps before she crashed into Vigo's back. He'd jerked to a halt. In another second, she saw why. Guards were already at the end of the corridor. It was too soon for them to have heard the disturbance and run inside, or to have been alerted by someone in the house. They must have noticed the open door. Her heart sank into the pit of her stomach. Why hadn't they closed the door? Still, their idea had been stupid and pointless as soon as they'd found out the display room was so far from the exit. The guards advanced, weapons drawn. Don't move, one called out, or we'll shoot. In here, said Pamuk, opening the nearest door. Maybe we can climb out of a window. It was the room where Carina had heard the strange mechanical noise. She darted inside, Vigo close behind her. It was a small anteroom with bare white walls and shelves containing what looked like medical equipment. There was also a tall metal cupboard which Vigo dragged across the door. There was no time to ponder these anomalous items. Pamuk was on her way through a second, heavier door. The mechanical noise burst out as she opened it. She screamed. Carina had never heard a merc scream. Pamuk stood in the doorway as if frozen. Carina peered around her and had trouble stifling her own scream. Vigo, looking over Pamuk's shoulder, only breathed, "Holy shit." In one corner of the room was a hospital bed. The machine they'd heard stood next to it, and tubes ran from the machine to the figure lying on the bed. Carina couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman, and not because the room was dark. There was sufficient light from the machines to see that the person was one giant, weeping, open sore. The machine was breathing for him or her, and liquid and nutrients seemed to be running through lines to the remains of the person's face and chest. The window, Pamuk stammered. Carina tore her gaze from the figure. The window was indeed open a few centimeters. Had the patient even registered their arrival? It was impossible to know. Vigo pushed past and marched to the window. He opened it to its fullest extent. "You two go first. You're lighter than me and less likely to break something." A scraping sound could be heard from the anteroom. There was no time to argue. Carina took a glance at the ground one floor below, barely able to make it out in the darkness, and leapt. As she landed, she rolled to absorb the impact. Getting to her feet, she was amazed to discover she seemed unhurt. Pamuk hit and grunted. She also rolled, but when she got up, she hobbled as she walked to Carina. Vigo's form was a silhouette against the dim light shining through the window above. He seemed to hesitate. A flash lit him up. He groaned and fell, impacting the ground with a sickening thump. The odour that emanated from him was nauseatingly familiar. He'd taken a hit from a pulse round. The guards must have broken through into the room. "Vigo!" Carina cried out. He'd taken a hit at nearly point-blank range, unarmoured. He'd had it. "Leave me." The words were a sigh on his exhaled breath. Pamuk pulled on her arm. "We have to go." Light flashed. They were being fired at. "I could save you." But she could not. Her merc training kicked in, and tears filling her eyes, she stepped away from his body. Pamuk was limping heavily. She put the woman's arm over her shoulder and grabbed her around her waist. They stumbled toward the fence. A pulse round exploded next to her foot, burning through her shoe. Stifling her cry of pain, she pushed on. Raised voices came from above. The guards were arguing. No more fire came. Though they were far from the spot where they'd scaled it, Burkan was ready, hanging down. He and Mads must have seen or heard the commotion and run to meet them. Carina helped Pamuk up to reach the outstretched hands. As soon as the murk was over, she took a short run and leapt, forcing herself to ignore the pain from her foot. She was on the other side of the fence. They disappeared into the night. They'd done it. They had the bowl, but it had cost Vigo his life. The end. This has been Galactic Rift, Mage Saga Book 8, written and narrated by J.J. Green. The next and final book in the Mage Saga is Neverwar, Mage Saga Book 9. For more J.J. Green books, visit jjgreenauthor.com.